I still remember the smell of that night more than anything else. Cold dirt, wet leaves, and the faint copper of old rust drifting through the air. It clung to my nose as if the whole road had been rotting for years. It was my first week of solo patrol. I'd been shadowing other officers for months, but this was the first time the radio called my number, and no one else was riding shotgun. The call was simple: trespassing. Just a possible break-in. Dispatch said some folks had been calling in about kids messing around in an abandoned farmhouse off County Road 17. I almost laughed when I heard it. I thought, of course. The new guy gets the ghost house. Everyone in town knew about that place. Even when I was a kid, we'd drive past it, and my mother would tell me to look the other way. She said it used to belong to a farming family back in the 50s. But something happened there. No one ever explained exactly what. Just whispers. And the whispers were enough to keep buyers away. The county had boarded it up, but it still stood there, leaning and forgotten on that crooked stretch of road. People said it was cursed. People also said it was where teenagers went to drink cheap beer and scare each other. I tried to shake off the nerves as I pulled the cruiser onto the shoulder. My headlights cut across the weeds, lighting up the farmhouse. It was worse up close. The roof sagged, the paint peeled like old scabs, and the windows were nothing but holes covered by plywood. The place looked hungry. I left the engine idling just in case. The radio crackled with other calls, but I felt far away from all of it. Out here, the night pressed down heavy like a wet blanket. No cars, no houses, just fields stretching into black. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. My boots crunched on gravel, and immediately I felt it. That quiet, not just nighttime quiet, not the kind where you hear crickets or a dog barking in the distance. This was empty. It felt like the world had taken one long breath and forgotten how to let it out. I walked toward the front gate. The fence was broken in places, leaning in on itself. The grass had grown chest-high in patches, and the dirt path leading up to the porch was muddy and uneven. My flashlight caught something nailed to the front door. A faded piece of cardboard, spray-painted with a warning, "Keep out." I thought about turning back right there. Not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because I already knew what I'd find. Probably some kids with flashlights. Maybe a fire pit in the yard. They'd scatter when they saw me, and I'd call it in as cleared. Easy. That's what I kept repeating. Easy. But as I pushed open the warped front gate, I noticed the tracks in the mud. Fresh, boot prints, too small for adults, too heavy for deer. I followed them to the porch. The boards groaned under my weight, and for a second I froze, listening. That's when I thought I heard it, just the faintest shuffle inside the house. Like someone dragging their feet over the floor, I called out. "Sheriff's Department. Anyone in there?" Silence. The sound was gone. I pulled my radio from my shoulder, thought about calling for backup, then stopped. If I called it in now, they'd laugh at me. First solo call, and the rookie asks for help with a couple of trespassing kids? No, I had to handle this. The front door hung slightly open. Not by much, just enough to show me the lock had been busted. The plywood over the window beside it had fresh pry marks, too. I pushed the door with my foot, and it creaked open. The air inside hit me like a wall. Damp, dusty, and thick with mold. My throat tightened instantly. I lifted the flashlight, sweeping across the living room. The furniture was gone, but the outlines were still there. Dark shapes on the wooden floor where couches had once been. Wallpaper peeled in long strips curling toward the ground. The place smelled old, but beneath it was something sharper. Almost metallic. I told myself it was just rust. The whole house looked like it was bleeding iron. "Anyone here?" I called again. My voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong inside these walls. Something moved upstairs. It was quick, barely there. A single thump. I swallowed hard, tried to steady my breathing. My heart was racing faster than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was raccoons, or the wind. Houses like this made noises, but my body didn't believe me. Every muscle was tight, waiting. I stepped further inside. My boots echoed on the hollow floor. The footprints continued, dirt smeared across the wood, heading toward the staircase. I stood at the base of the stairs, shining my light upward. The steps disappeared into the dark, the railing eaten away by rot. Another sound, this time behind me. I spun, light cutting across the room. Nothing, just shadows against shadows. My mouth was dry, but I forced out words. "Sheriff's Department. If anyone's here, you need to come out." Silence. Only the sound of my own breathing. I turned back to the stairs. I didn't want to go up. Every instinct screamed at me not to, but I knew what the report would say if I didn't check. Rookie ignored evidence. Failed to clear the property. I'd never live it down. So I started climbing. The wood creaked under every step. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight like tiny insects swirling in the air. Halfway up, I stopped. Something was written on the wall in black marker. At first, I thought it was graffiti, but as I got closer, I realized it was names, hundreds of them, scrawled in different handwriting all over the wall, children's names. I touched the edge of one. The ink had bled into the plaster, old but not ancient. The beam of my flashlight flickered, and for a second, the names seemed to ripple, like they were moving. I blinked hard. It was just the dust, just my nerves. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched left and right. More peeling wallpaper, more boarded windows, and there it was again. A sound. Not footsteps this time. Whispering. Faint, but I could hear it. Words I couldn't make out, like someone speaking behind a closed door. I raised my light, moving slowly down the hall. Each step felt heavier. Then it stopped. Just gone. I stood there, ears straining, waiting for it to start again. But nothing. Finally, I exhaled. My breath came out shaky, louder than I meant. I realized I'd been holding it. That was enough. I wasn't going any further. I told myself I'd seen enough evidence of trespassing, the broken lock, the footprints, the writing on the walls. I could clear it. I could get out. I turned, started back toward the stairs, and that's when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, just past the edge of my light, the outline of a door. It was different from the others. This one wasn't boarded. It was locked. A heavy padlock hung from the latch. My stomach dropped. Why would an abandoned farmhouse have a locked room? The whispers rose again, just for a moment, curling through the hallway like smoke. I froze, light shaking in my hand, but when I blinked, the sound was gone. The door sat there, still and quiet, like it had never made a sound at all. I didn't move closer. I couldn't. I backed down the stairs instead, my eyes never leaving that shadowed door at the end of the hall. When I finally stepped back outside, the night air hit me so hard I almost doubled over. I radioed dispatch, voice as steady as I could make it. County 12, cleared. Just evidence of trespassing. No subjects found. But that wasn't true, because I knew. I hadn't been alone in there, and I knew that locked door wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to keep something in. The house never really left me that night, even after I drove away, even after the radio filled my car with the usual chatter. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The footprints in the mud, the whispers in the hall, that locked door. I didn't mention the whispers in my report, of course. How could I? If I wrote that down, I'd be done before my career even started. But I did note the trespassing signs, the busted lock, the mud tracked through the floor. It was enough to justify keeping the place on the radar. For a while, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Nerves. First solo call jitters. Everyone had told me it happens, and I tried to believe that. But the thing about silence is, it stays with you. That hollow, heavy silence from the house had followed me. I carried it in my chest like I'd swallowed it whole. A week later, dispatch sent me back, another trespassing call, same address. This time, I didn't laugh. I remember gripping the wheel tighter than I should have. My knuckles pale under the dashboard glow. My stomach twisted the whole drive out there. And this time, backup was on the way. 2 deputies were already rolling, but I was the closest. So I got there first. The night was different, warmer, a little windier. But the house looked the same, rotting in the field like an open wound. My headlights caught the boards across the windows, and I swear they looked like ribs sticking through broken skin. The gate leaned farther than before. The grass was more trampled. And the front door, the one I'd seen pulled tight last week, was wide open now. I stepped out of the cruiser, radio at my shoulder. County 12, I'm 1023. On scene, the farmhouse loomed against the sky, black and jagged. I felt like it was watching me. I waited, but the deputies were still 10 minutes out. 10 minutes is nothing when you're in town. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, with that house breathing in front of you, 10 minutes is forever. I clicked on my flashlight and forced myself forward. The porch groaned as I stepped up, the door yawning wider at my touch. The smell was the same, wet wood, mold, and rust. My stomach clenched instantly. The footprints were back, dirt smeared across the floorboards, trailing inside, and above me, the sound. Not faint. Not a whisper, clear, heavy. Footsteps. Someone was upstairs. I froze, light trembling across the ruined walls. The sound was slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. My throat went dry. "Sheriff's Department!" I shouted, louder than before. "Come down now!" The footsteps stopped. Just stopped. My ears rang in the silence. I could feel sweat gathering at the base of my neck. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the pacing started again, directly above me this time. Back and forth, the boards groaning under weight. This wasn't a raccoon. This wasn't the wind. There was someone up there. My heart hammered, but I forced my legs to move. I raised the flashlight and stepped toward the stairs. Halfway up, the beam caught those names again. Dozens of them, scrawled on the wall. Children's names in crooked, desperate handwriting. They seemed darker than before, as if the ink hadn't aged a day. The footsteps stopped again. I froze mid-step, staring at the ceiling. It was right above me. Whoever or whatever it was. And then the house shifted. A long creak, like weight moving toward the hall. I swallowed hard, gripped the railing, and pushed up the last few steps. The hallway stretched out in both directions, darker than I remembered. My flashlight shook as it cut across peeling wallpaper and gaping doorways. Silence. I took a step forward, then another. My boots barely touched the floor, but the boards moaned under each movement. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Every hair on my arms stood up, my skin prickling. The air was thick, pressing against me. Then, a door at the end of the hall slammed shut. The sound cracked through the silence so loud, I almost dropped the flashlight. I whipped the beam toward it. The locked door, the same one from last week. The heavy padlock still hung there. But the sound, it had come from inside that room. I raised my radio, my voice tight. "County 12 to 32 and 14, what's your ETA?" The reply came back with static. "About 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I didn't want to wait in the hallway." Not with that door. Not with the silence crawling up my spine. I backed toward the stairs, eyes locked on the far end of the hall. The flashlight shook so bad I had to grip it with both hands. Then, another sound. Not footsteps. Not whispers. A laugh, soft, short, from upstairs. I froze. My throat closed and my vision tunneled on the locked door. The laugh didn't come again, but the air shifted. Heavy, like the whole house leaned closer. That's when I heard the front door creak open downstairs. Voices. Footsteps. The deputies had arrived. I nearly stumbled over myself racing down the stairs. Relief hitting so hard I felt dizzy. Deputy Harris stepped in first, flashlight sweeping. Behind him was Lee, taller, quieter, scanning the corners. They looked at me, their expressions sharp. "What have you got?" Harris asked. I pointed up. "Someone's upstairs." I heard them. Footsteps. They slammed the back room door. The two deputies exchanged a look. Not disbelief, just weary acceptance. Like they'd done this before. Harris nodded. "All right, let's clear it." We moved as a unit. Harris in front, Lee behind me. The stairs groaned under our weight, the hall waiting like an open throat. We reached the locked door together. It was still shut, still chained with the heavy padlock. Harris frowned, tugging on it. "You said it slammed?" "Yes," I whispered. "I heard it. I swear I did." Lee shone his light over the frame, checking. No pry marks, no scratches. Just old wood and rust. They both looked at me again. Not mocking, not laughing, just quiet. "We'll clear the rest," Harris said. We moved room to room. Empty. Dust, rot, and old boards. No kids, no squatters, no trespassers. But the whole time, my eyes kept flicking back to that locked door. When we regrouped at the stairs, Harris clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing calling us. These old places make noise. Wind, animals, you name it. Don't let it get in your head." But it had gotten in my head. Because I knew what I'd heard. Footsteps, a laugh, and the slam of that locked door. As we headed back outside, I looked up at the farmhouse one last time. The upstairs windows gaped like empty eyes. The wind picked up, carrying a faint sound through the fields. It almost sounded like children. But when I turned to the deputies, neither of them seemed to hear it, and that's when I realized whatever was in that house, it wanted me to hear it. Not them. Me. After that second call, I couldn't shake it anymore. I kept telling myself the deputies were right, that old houses creak and groan, that nerves play tricks. But it didn't matter how many times I repeated it. Deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. That house wanted me back. Every night after, when I lay in bed, I heard it. Not in the air around me, but in my head. That soft laugh. The one upstairs. It curled inside me like smoke, waiting. A week passed, then 2. I tried to focus on work. Traffic stops, bar fights, welfare checks. But every time my radio crackled, I expected to hear it. County Road 17. That address. And one night it came again. This time, it wasn't trespassers. Dispatch logged it as suspicious circumstances. A driver passing by said they saw a light in one of the upstairs windows. But the house didn't have power. I should have said no. I should have let someone else take it. But I didn't. I answered the call. The drive out felt shorter this time, though my stomach was tighter with every mile. When I pulled onto the shoulder, the farmhouse waited in the dark, like it knew I'd come back. I sat in the cruiser longer than I should have, staring at the warped shape against the horizon. There was no light now. Just black windows and sagging boards. Finally, I killed the engine and stepped out. The night was warmer than before. The air thick, heavy with humidity. My flashlight cut through swaying weeds as I walked up the path. The front door was closed this time, but the lock was still broken. I stepped inside, boots crunching over old plaster. The smell hadn't changed. Mold and rust sharp in my throat, I stood there listening. At first, nothing. Just my own breath, the faint hum of cicadas outside. Then, faint, deliberate, footsteps above me. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd expected it. Like a script I already knew by heart, I raised the radio. "County 12, I'll be checking upstairs. No backup this time. No deputies on the way. Just me." I climbed the stairs slowly, my flashlight catching the names scrawled along the wall. I counted them as I passed, lips moving silently. Dozens, maybe hundreds, and when I reached the top, the air changed. It was colder up there, damp against my skin. The hall stretched quiet and dark, every doorway a mouth yawning open. At the end, waiting like it always had, was the locked door. I walked toward it. Each step felt heavier, like I was sinking into the floor. My light caught the padlock, rusted and swollen with age. But tonight, something was different. The door was trembling, just a little. Barely there, as if something inside was pushing ever so slightly against it. My mouth went dry. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. "Sheriff's Department," I managed, though my voice cracked. "If someone's in there, you need to come out now." Silence, then scratching. Not soft, not like mice. Deep, slow, long claw marks dragging against wood. I staggered back a step, flashlight shaking across the hall. The sound kept going, steady, deliberate. Like whatever was inside wasn't trying to get out fast. It was just reminding me it was there. I raised my radio again. "County 12 requesting..." The words died in my throat because the scratching stopped, and then, clear as a voice right next to my ear, I heard it. "Help me!" A child's whisper, thin, fragile. I froze. My skin crawled cold, every instinct screaming to run, but my feet stayed planted. I stared at that padlock. The voice came again, this time softer. "Please, help me." My hand moved before I knew it. I reached for the lock, tugging. It rattled against the latch but held tight. Old, but strong. Something slammed against the other side of the door. I jumped back, my flashlight swinging wild. The whole frame shuddered, dust raining from the ceiling. Again, bang! The door bowed outward. The lock straining, whatever was in there wanted out. I stumbled back to the stairs, heart clawing at my chest. My radio slipped from my shoulder, static hissing as it hit the floor. "Help me," the voice whispered again. This time, not pleading. Not weak, different, hungry. The padlock snapped. The sound rang sharp, metal clattering against the floor. The door creaked, wood splintering as it eased open an inch. I didn't wait to see what came through. I bolted down the stairs, my boots barely hitting the steps. I crashed through the front door out into the night air, and didn't stop until I was inside the cruiser. Engine roaring. My hands shook as I threw it into drive. Gravel spitting behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. I told myself I'd report it, that I'd call it in, explain the broken lock, the noises, the voices, but I couldn't. I couldn't put any of that into words without sounding insane, so I wrote nothing, and I thought maybe I'd left it behind. But that night, the dream came. I was standing in the farmhouse hallway. The names on the walls glowed faintly in the dark, like embers. I walked toward the locked door, only it wasn't locked anymore. It stood wide open, black inside. From the darkness, small hands reached out. Children's hands, dozens of them, pale and thin. They gripped my arms, my legs, pulling me in. Their voices all whispered together, one word over and over, "Stay." I woke drenched in sweat, my sheets twisted around me. The next night, it happened again. And again, every dream ends the same. The door open, the children pulling, their voices whispering. And now, even when I'm awake, I swear I hear them, in the quiet of my apartment, in the hum of the cruiser, even in the chatter of the radio. Always the same word. Stay. I haven't told anyone. Who would believe me? A rookie officer haunted by an empty house? But I know this. That door was locked for a reason, and I was the one who let it open. I don't know if you've ever had a place in your town that everyone whispers about. The kind of place that sits half-rotted, windows boarded, yard growing wild, yet somehow it's alive in people's minds. For us, that place was the duplex on Mill Street. It had been condemned for years. The city slapped their orange stickers on the doors, warning trespassers, warning squatters. No utilities, no renovations, just a hollow shell with sagging wood and broken gutters. But that didn't stop the calls. We called them frequent flyers. Same address over and over, clogging the line. Neighbors on both sides of the street swore up and down that something was happening inside that house. Kids breaking in, fights, flashlights at night, sometimes even screams. But every time we showed up, it was empty. At first, I thought maybe it was drug activity. A place like that, it attracts people, the kind of people who slip through cracks. But the longer I worked that beat, the stranger it got. Because the neighbors weren't just calling out of paranoia. They all described the same things. One lady across the street, a widow named Mrs. Shaw, called in 3 nights in a row. She swore she saw figures in the windows pacing back and forth. She said they never used the front door, only appeared and disappeared. When we showed up, nothing. Dust thick enough to tell us nobody had walked those floors in weeks. Another man, Mr. Lambert, said he heard voices, loud ones, arguing in the middle of the night. He lived in the unit attached to the condemned one, and he told us the sound was so real it rattled his picture frames. We stood there in his living room while he shook his head, pointing at the wall. "You hear it, right? They're in there right now." But on our side of that wall, only silence. Empty rooms, cold air, peeling wallpaper. At first, the calls frustrated us. We'd drive out, check the property, walk through the weeds, shine our flashlights into the darkness, and log it as unfounded, over and over again. We joked about it at roll call. Mill Street's acting up again, but the more it happened, the less funny it felt. Because after a while I realized it wasn't random. The reports always came in waves. nights of total quiet. Then suddenly back-to-back calls from different neighbors. Some swore they saw people at the windows, others heard doors slamming. The details didn't match, but the timing did, like whatever was happening in there. It was spreading. I remember one night in particular. It was a Tuesday. The air had that heavy, sticky heat that makes the whole town restless. My partner and I were sitting in the car parked outside a diner when the radio crackled. Possible disturbance. South Mill Street. Caller reports shouting inside the residence, I groaned. My partner just shook his head. We already knew the address. By the time we rolled up, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. I remember their faces in the streetlights, anxious, expectant, like they were waiting for us to prove them right. One man pointed at the upper window. "They're in there." I saw a shadow move past the curtain. Another swore he heard someone crying. We did the routine. Knocked at the door of the attached unit, spoke with the tenants. Nothing. Then we circled the condemned half. The plywood boards were still nailed tight. No forced entry. No signs of life. But standing there in the overgrown yard, I felt something I couldn't shake. The air was wrong. It was too still, too quiet. Even the bugs had gone silent. My partner muttered something about wild imaginations and started back toward the cruiser. But I stayed there, staring up at that second-floor window, and for just a second, I swear I saw the curtain twitch. We cleared the place top to bottom. Flashlights cutting across bare floors, broken cabinets, dust piled thick as snow. No footprints, no food wrappers. Nothing to suggest anyone had been inside for months. When we came back out, the neighbors were restless. One of them asked, "Did you check the basement?" I told him the structure was unsafe, sealed off, which was true. The staircase was half collapsed, boards nailed over the entry. But he just looked at me, eyes dark, and said, "That's where the noise comes from." That comment stuck with me longer than it should have. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. Kids claimed to see a man standing in the doorway at night. An older woman reported hearing knocking, steady, rhythmic, like someone tapping on the pipes. We'd show up. We'd search. Nothing. After a while, the guys at the station stopped treating it like a joke, because there's only so many times you can walk through the same lifeless rooms before you start to wonder if it's you who's missing something, like the house has a way of hiding it. And me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. It's hard to explain, but every time I walked that property, the same thought sat heavy in my chest. Something was watching, not from the street, not from the neighbors' windows, but from inside. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, the power of suggestion. But deep down, I knew better, because the house on Mill Street had become more than just a condemned duplex. It had become a presence, and no matter how many times we cleared it, no matter how many times we logged unfounded, the calls kept coming, relentless, predictable, like the house itself was making sure we never forgot about it. And that was just the beginning. There's something about a dark house that unsettles people. Maybe it's because you can't see what's inside, or maybe it's because in the dark your mind starts filling in the blanks. But the house on Mill Street, it didn't stay dark. The first call came from Mrs. Shaw again. She lived across the street, and she had the kind of eyes that never missed a thing. She told dispatch that she saw a light on the second floor, glowing through the boards nailed across the windows. We didn't take it seriously at first. That property had no electricity. The power company cut it years ago, and the lines were still disconnected. So when she said the windows were glowing, we figured maybe kids had gotten in again. Flashlights, maybe a lantern. But when we pulled up, the entire street was quiet. The only light came from the weak orange glow of the street lamp at the corner. The duplex itself sat there like it always did. Dark, skeletal, hollow, no glow. No movement. Just black windows and sagging wood. We checked around, found nothing, logged it, and went back to patrol. But the calls didn't stop. The next night, a different neighbor called. He swore he saw a steady white light pulsing in the front window like a television screen. Bright as day, he said, flickering like someone switching channels. That one bothered me more, because there had never been a television in there. not since the city cleared it out. By the third night, the reports were piling up. Blue light, white light, orange flickers. Some said it looked like candles. Others swore it was electric. Different witnesses, same description. The house lit up when nobody should have been able to light it. We started treating the calls differently. I remember standing outside with my partner, staring at the second-floor window. And for the first time, I saw it too. Not much. Just a thin, weak flicker. But it was there. A pale flash across the boards, there and gone again. I wanted to believe it was just headlights bouncing from a passing car. But the street was empty. No cars, no movement. Just the two of us, the crickets, and that faint glow bleeding through the cracks of a house that had no power. My partner muttered under his breath, "That's not possible." And he was right. We went inside again, even though both of us already knew we'd find nothing. Our flashlights cut through stale air, floating dust, walls stripped down to wood and plaster. There were no wires, no bulbs, no candles, no sign of trespassers. Yet the neighbors kept calling. Some swore the lights came at the same time each night, always between midnight and 3. Some claimed it wasn't just flickering, but moving, like the light was following something inside, tracing its shape across the walls. One man told us he saw a shadow pass in front of it. He described it as tall, hunched, with arms too long for its body. He was pale when he said it, like he wasn't sure he should have spoken it out loud. And I'll be honest, his words stuck with me, because once, while we were clearing the upstairs hallway, I thought I saw the same thing. It was faint, just a quick impression, a shape breaking the beam of my flashlight. But it didn't look like my partner. It didn't move like a person. I told myself it was a trick of the eyes. But the longer I stared at that hallway, the colder my chest felt. I didn't admit it to anyone, but I started driving past the duplex even when I wasn't dispatched there. Just circling the block, slowing down as I passed, scanning those windows. And sometimes, I'd catch it. A weak flicker. Pale, bluish, like the glow of an old television set left on in a dark room. But it was never steady. Always just quick enough to catch at the corner of my eye, always gone when I looked straight at it. The neighbors got restless. They started accusing each other of making it up, of fueling some kind of hysteria. But even the ones who rolled their eyes still peeked through their curtains at night, watching that house, waiting. It got to the point where people would gather in little knots on the sidewalk after dark, whispering, pointing, hoping to catch the glow for themselves, and more than once. They did. I'll never forget one particular night. It was just after 1 in the morning. We got another call, same address, same story. By the time we arrived, a small group of neighbors was standing across the street, faces pale and tight, all staring up at the second floor. And when I followed their eyes, I saw it clear as day. A soft, steady light pulsing behind the boards. Faint but real. It lingered this time, didn't vanish as soon as we looked. It glowed through the cracks, spread against the curtains like a lantern trapped in a box. And for the first time, I didn't want to go inside, because watching that light, I realized something. It wasn't random. It wasn't a trick of the eyes. It felt deliberate, like whatever was inside wanted us to see it. My partner whispered, "That can't be happening," his voice cracked. And I knew he was fighting the same chill in his chest that I felt in mine. We crossed the street anyway. Training makes you move even when your body tells you not to. We walked through the weeds, through the broken gate, past the rotten porch. The glow was steady as we approached, faint but undeniable. My hand shook as I reached for the door. And then, the second we stepped inside, it died. The house swallowed us in silence and darkness, dust, cold air. No footprints, no wires, no source of anything, and the neighbors outside, they swore they still saw it. Even as we stood inside in pitch black, calling back and forth with our flashlights raised, that's when I stopped joking about the place. Because whatever lived inside that house, it had its own rules. The lights never stopped. The calls kept coming, night after night. Sometimes it was just one flicker. Other times, neighbors said the whole house glowed, like every room was filled with fire. Some swore they heard a buzzing with it, like an old fluorescent bulb humming, low and sick. We couldn't explain it. We couldn't stop it. And standing out there night after night, watching that window glow with impossible light. I realized something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't about trespassers. It wasn't about kids breaking in. It wasn't even about electricity. The house itself was waking up, and the flickering window was its first signal. The strange. Lights on Mill Street should have been enough. They should have been the moment we stepped back and admitted something was wrong. But they weren't, because the calls didn't stop, and eventually, the house pulled us in deeper. It started with noise. One of the first reports came from Mr. Lambert, the man who shared a wall with the condemned unit. He said he woke up around midnight to the sound of people arguing right on the other side of his bedroom wall. Clear as day, two voices, male and female, shouting at each other. By the time we got there, of course, the place was empty. But Mr. Lambert wasn't lying. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he pointed at the wall. "You think I'm making this up? You think I don't know what I heard?" It was hard to argue with him, because standing in that room with him, I felt something too. Not a sound, not exactly, but the air itself seemed heavy, like it remembered the noise even after it had stopped. And then it happened to us. The first time I heard it, I was walking that long, narrow hallway upstairs. My partner was a few steps ahead of me, his flashlight beam bouncing across warped wallpaper and cracked plaster. And then, soft, distant, but unmistakable, I heard voices. Two people. Low, hushed, like they didn't want us to hear them. I froze, lifting a hand to stop my partner. We both stood there, listening. And for a moment, it was real. I swear to you, it was real. The faint murmur of a conversation drifting from the rooms ahead of us. Then, as soon as we stepped forward, silence. We swept the rooms one by one. Nothing but dust, debris, and the faint smell of mildew. I tried to brush it off, told myself maybe it was sound carrying from the street. But there were no cars outside, no people, just us. The second time was worse. We were clearing the ground floor, moving slow, calling out the usual warnings. My light cut across the old kitchen, its cabinets rotted and doors hanging open. And that's when I heard it again, this time, not faint, not distant, a man's voice. Clear, right there in the room with us. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone chilled me, firm, angry, like he was scolding someone. I spun, flashlight slicing across the room. Empty. My partner swore he heard it too. We stood there, backs against the wall, breathing hard, straining to hear. For a few long seconds, the voice kept going, rising and falling in rhythm until it cut off mid-word. Like someone hit a switch. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, because that silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. After that, we started hearing it more often. Not every time, but enough. Low conversations drifting through the halls. Muffled arguments echoing between the walls. Laughter sometimes. Sharp, sudden, wrong. And no matter how quickly we moved, no matter how carefully we searched, we never found anyone. The worst part was, the voices weren't always ahead of us. Sometimes, they came from behind. I remember one night, I was at the top of the stairs, my partner on the floor below when I heard it. A woman's voice right behind me, a whisper. I didn't catch the words, but I felt her breath brush my ear. I spun so fast I nearly lost my balance. Nothing, just empty air. My flashlight bouncing off peeling wallpaper. I didn't tell my partner about that one. Some things you keep to yourself. Because by then, I'd started to wonder if the house was playing with us. Not just making sounds, not just mimicking, but choosing. It never let us catch it directly, always leading us by the ear, pulling us deeper down its dark hallways, making us chase echoes that vanished when we got too close. And I swear, after a while, it learned our names. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. We were in the upstairs hall again, lights cutting across the floorboards, when I heard it. A whisper. A man's voice. Low, gravelly, and it said my name. I froze. My chest locked up. My throat went dry. My partner asked what was wrong, but I couldn't answer him. I just stood there in that hallway, staring into the dark, knowing without a doubt that something unseen had just spoken to me. After that, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Between my own thoughts and the house. Between the silence and the voices, Sometimes I'd hear them faintly, even when we weren't inside. Driving past the block, sitting in the cruiser, even at home, lying awake in bed, little scraps of sound, too quick to catch. Whispers curling just out of reach. And I knew if I leaned in too close, if I listened too hard, I might never come back. I tried to convince myself it was stress, that the job was getting under my skin. But then my partner admitted he was hearing them too, and that's when I realized the house wasn't just speaking to me, it was speaking to both of us. The calls from neighbors kept coming, but the reports changed. People said the arguments sounded violent now, like fights breaking out in the middle of the night. Some swore they heard children crying. Others claimed to hear singing, soft, lilting, mournful. The voices never lasted long enough for anyone else to catch them. But for those who did, the effect was always the same. Fear, unease, the sense that you weren't overhearing strangers, but intruding on something private, something that didn't want you there. That feeling grew each time we entered the house. The air thicker, heavier, carrying echoes we couldn't trace. And the longer we stayed, the more the walls themselves seemed to lean in, pressing close, holding secrets just out of reach. I knew then that the lights had only been the beginning, because now, the house wasn't just showing itself, it was speaking, and we were the ones forced to listen. It wasn't the lights, or the whispers, or the arguments. It was the basement. I'd avoided it for weeks. Everyone did. The staircase was half collapsed, boards nailed across the entry, the smell of rot so strong it made your stomach turn. But that night, after another string of calls, my partner and I found ourselves standing at the foot of the house, staring at that rotten doorway. The air was still, thick, heavy. You could feel it pressing against your skin. I'd never admitted it to anyone. But part of me had hoped the basement would remain off limits forever, that whatever was inside could stay down there, hidden. But curiosity, fear, duty, I don't know which one drove me forward. We started prying the boards loose, my hands shaking, heart hammering in my chest. The wood was brittle, dry, splintered with age, and it took all our strength to pull it aside. Once the gap was big enough to step through, a smell hit us. Wet earth, mildew, decay, and something else. Something alive. I swallowed hard. My flashlight cut across the stairwell. The stairs themselves were steep, narrow, and slick with water and rot. The concrete floor at the bottom looked cracked, stained, and older than anything else in the house. I stepped down first. My partner followed, flashlight tight in his grip. Each step echoed, bouncing off the walls, filling the small space with sound. At the bottom, we found the remains of the previous squatters. Old mattresses, broken furniture, empty cans, discarded clothes, evidence of human life. But it felt abandoned for years, and yet, we weren't alone. A scratching sound came from beneath the concrete floor. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic, like nails dragging through soil. I froze. My partner froze. We didn't need to speak. The sound said enough. It wasn't rats. It wasn't plumbing. It was something aware, something moving beneath us. The scratching grew louder, faster. The sound shifted as if something was circling, listening to us, testing us. I wanted to run. My body screamed to bolt up the stairs, to leave this place behind. But my feet stayed planted. My flashlight shivered in my hands. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. My partner nodded, pale, gripping his own light like a lifeline. Then it stopped. Silence. Thick, heavy silence that pressed against our ears. The kind of silence that makes you think the next sound will rip your skull open. And then a whisper from beneath the concrete. Not a voice we could recognize, not human. Something low, guttural, wet-sounding. A sound that rolled against the walls of the basement and sank deep into my chest. I wanted to tell myself it was the floor settling, that it was the old pipes, that it was anything but what it was. But the sound came again. This time, it was joined by movement. Something shifting beneath the surface, something trying to dig its way out, scraping along the edges of the concrete, leaving faint black streaks on the floor. I stepped back. My partner did too. "Get out," I whispered. almost unable to form the words. My voice sounded wrong to me, too loud, too harsh, but it didn't leave. It continued scratching, louder, insistent, like it knew we were there, like it wanted us to see it. Then, a hand, or something like it, pushed up through a crack in the floor, thin, pale, clawed. It scrabbled at the concrete, leaving deep grooves. I could see the shadow of it twisting under the weak light of our flashlights. I swallowed hard. My stomach turned. Every instinct screamed at me to move, but some part of me couldn't look away. Another hand followed, then an arm. A shape, writhing, clawing, pushing, trying to escape its tomb. My partner shouted, and we both jumped back, hearts hammering. But the thing didn't stop. It kept moving, scraping, pressing, testing the surface that kept it contained. And then, as suddenly as it started, it paused. The basement fell into silence again. I didn't breathe. My partner didn't breathe. We stood there, frozen, staring at the cracked concrete like it was a living thing. Then, a faint voice. Go! Not a whisper this time. Clear, insistent, human. Not human? I couldn't tell. It sounded like it came from the walls themselves, from the floor, from everywhere and nowhere. My hands shook as I raised my flashlight again, scanning every corner. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Only the floor, scarred by something that had been alive and desperate below. We backed up slowly, never taking our eyes off it. Step by step, up the rotten stairs, out of the basement, into the stale air of the first floor. And when we emerged, the air felt different, charged, expectant. We didn't speak about it much afterward. Not at the station, not at roll call. Some things aren't meant to be explained. But I know what I heard, what I felt, what tried to reach out from beneath that floor. The calls kept coming for weeks after. The neighbors never stopped reporting lights, sounds, shadows, movements inside that condemned duplex. Some claimed to see figures crawling out from the basement. Others swore the walls themselves breathed. I don't know what's down there. I don't want to, but I know this. Whatever it is, it's alive, and it remembers us. The Mill Street property isn't just a condemned house, it's a predator. Lying in wait, feeding on curiosity, fear, and attention. And if you get too close, if you step across that threshold, you'll hear it scratching, you'll hear it whispering your name, and you'll understand, in a way you can't unlearn, that some places are never meant to be entered. Because what lives beneath isn't human, it isn't kind, and it's patient. Very, very patient. I hate this house. Every time my cruiser slows down in front of it, I feel something crawl over my skin. That feeling you get when you're being watched, but worse. Like the house itself knows me. Like it's been waiting. Tonight makes the third time. Third call. Same report. Same voice on the line. Screaming coming from the old ranch house on Turner Road. The words had barely finished coming through dispatch before I knew where they were sending me. And even as I turned down the dirt road, my radio crackled with disbelief from the other end. Again? Same place? They don't hide it anymore. The tone, the little chuckles under their breath, like I'm some rookie chasing shadows. But I'm not imagining this. I've been inside that house, I've heard it. The first time, I thought it was squatters, maybe some kids messing around. The windows are boarded, but a few gaps are wide enough for someone desperate enough to crawl through. The second time, I swore I saw movement upstairs, a shadow ducking past the window. And both times I heard that sound. A woman. Screaming. Not the kind of scream you'd fake for attention. It was raw, ragged. It clawed right down the middle of my spine. But every time I cleared the house, room by room, it was empty. No footprints in the dust. No signs anyone had been there for years. And now, I'm back again. The headlights of my cruiser cut across the ranch. The house is just a shell. Paint peeled down to bare wood. Porch sagging, the yard eaten by weeds that haven't been touched in a decade. A place no one should live in, yet someone keeps calling it in. The air feels heavier the second I step out. Cold too, though the night is mild. I keep telling myself it's just the location. Places hold memory. They hold grief too, and the Johnson place has both. That's what we call it, the Johnson place. It was 10 years ago when it happened. Family of 4. Father shot them all before turning the gun on himself. Nobody lasted long after that. People say the place never settled. Realtors tried selling it once or twice, but buyers never stayed. Nobody wants a home with blood in the walls, but that doesn't explain what I've heard here. I walk up the porch, wood groaning under my boots. My flashlight beam cuts through the open doorway where the door once stood. The first thing that always hits me is the smell. Old wood, dust, and something else. Something sour. I call it in out of habit. Unit 12 checking the property. Third time tonight, static. Then a lazy reply from dispatch. Copy that. Again. They don't believe me. Not really. They'll log my call, but when I radio back to say the place is empty, I know they'll snicker about it again. I step inside. The living room is just bones, walls stripped of wallpaper, floorboards warped. My light follows the same path as always, to the staircase, then across to the kitchen doorway. I try to move slow, deliberate, my breathing steady, but my body knows this house now. It knows what's coming. And then it happens. That sound. A scream. It comes sharp from upstairs, cutting through the silence so suddenly I almost drop my light. It's a woman's voice, high, desperate, tearing itself apart. The kind of sound that only comes from real fear. I freeze at the base of the stairs, listening. It stops as suddenly as it started. My chest tightens. I whisper into the radio. I've got screaming inside. Request backup. Dispatch crackles back, annoyed. Unit 12, negative. We've cleared that property twice already. No signs of anyone on scene. I press harder. I heard it just now. Clear as day, but they're not buying it. A sigh, then. 10-4. Check it again. Alone. My throat is dry as I lift my boot onto the first step. The stairs sag under my weight, every groan of wood loud enough to wake the dead. I sweep the light across the railing, catching dust swirling in the beam like smoke. Halfway up, I stop. The air shifts. Heavy. The kind of heavy that presses down on you. I hear the faintest sound, a shuffle. Like bare feet dragging across wood. Hello? My voice cracks. Sheriff's Department. Come out now! No answer. I reach the top. The hallway stretches left and right, doors open like waiting mouths. I move to the first one, my light falling across what used to be a bedroom. Wallpaper stripped, floor covered in dust. Nothing inside but a broken dresser on its side. I turn back, moving toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. That's when I hear it again. Softer this time. A moan, almost. From behind the closed door ahead, I grip the handle. My glove squeaks on the metal. I count to 3, push it open, and sweep my light inside, empty. Just an old bed frame. Window boarded shut. Floor covered in dirt and scraps of plaster. But I swear I saw someone move across the far wall just before the light hit. Come out, I call, my voice louder than I feel. You're not in trouble. I just need to know you're safe. Nothing. I step inside. The floor creaks. I shine my light across every corner, every shadow. The closet is empty. The bathroom door hangs off its hinge. Nothing behind it but black tile, and yet the feeling doesn't leave me. That presence, like someone standing right behind me, just out of reach. I back out slowly, keeping my light ahead. My breath fogs in front of me, though the air isn't cold. My radio crackles again, dispatch's voice breaking the silence. Unit 12, status check? I swallow. Clear. Nobody here. But I don't believe it, not anymore. Because as I turn down the hallway, I hear something new. A whisper. My name. It slides across the walls. So soft, I almost think I imagined it. But I didn't. And the worst part? Dispatch doesn't believe me. The radio goes dead first. I didn't notice it right away. Too focused on the sound behind the walls. But when I reached for my shoulder mic and heard nothing, the first knot of panic tied itself around my chest. Static. Just static. I tapped it, jiggled it, cursed under my breath. Unit 12, do you copy? Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. Dispatch is gone. Gone. Like the house swallowed them whole before I even realized it. And the longer I stand there listening, the heavier the walls seem to press in on me. I can feel it. Movement. Something behind the plaster. Slow, deliberate, dragging, breathing. I tell myself it's rats. Maybe a stray dog that got in. But I know better. I've been inside this house 3 times tonight, counting the first call from earlier. Rats don't scream. Rats don't move like this. I take a step toward the staircase. Every floorboard groans under my weight. like the house is watching, judging, waiting for me to slip. I shine my flashlight across the wall near the stairs. Shadows flicker where they shouldn't. The kind of flicker that doesn't make sense, too smooth, too purposeful. And then I hear it. A sound behind the wall. Not loud, not obvious. A shuffle, a scrape, a low, wet sigh. It comes again, then stops. I move closer, hand on the plaster. My fingers press against the wall, feeling nothing at first, just cold, dusty wood underneath. But then I feel it. A pulse. No, not a pulse. A thump like a heartbeat, or a fist, or something that's been trapped in the walls, waiting. I step back, gripping my flashlight tighter. My breathing is loud in the silence. Every instinct tells me to leave. Every rule in the manual screams to get out while I still can. But I can't, because I've been here before. And it's not empty. The hallway stretches ahead, darker than I remember. Shadows pool in the corners, twisting like smoke. My boots click against the floorboards, and each click echoes too long, too loud. I reach the master bedroom again, the one where I swore I saw movement last time. The door is cracked. I didn't leave it that way. The hinges are stiff, old. I didn't touch it, I hesitate. My hand hovers over the knob and my mind races. What if this time it's not just shadows? I push it slowly. Inside, the room is empty. Dust hangs in the air like fog. Boards on the floor are cracked, ripped. But I see it, light catching on something in the corner. Something dark, small, crouched. I shine the beam. Nothing. I blink. The shadow shifts. I take a step back. My heart hammers. The radio is dead. There's no one to hear me if it gets worse. I try to call again. Unit 12, dispatch? Nothing. I pound the radio, frustrated, panic rising. But the dead silence is worse than the movement behind the walls. At least if something is moving, it exists. At least if I scream, maybe someone will hear me eventually. But there is no one. I start down the hallway. The air is thick, almost sticky. I feel like I'm wading through it. My flashlight flickers. I slam it, try to keep it steady. Shadows crawl just outside the beam. The house seems to breathe around me. Then I hear it. A whisper. Low, wet, curling along the wood. Get out! I freeze. My blood runs cold. I tell myself it's in my head. It has to be. The first call tonight, the second, it was just nerves. But this is different. This is right behind me. I spin. Empty hallway. I take a cautious step forward and the whisper comes again. Get out! I realize it's not just words. It's coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. I can feel it inside my chest, vibrating with my heartbeat. And then the first real movement. Something skims across the far wall. Too fast to be human. Too fluid. A dark smear that slides into the shadows. I shine my light, but it's gone. I take another step, my boot catching on something soft. I look down. A pile of debris, nothing more. I kick it aside. But the sensation of being touched remains. Something brushed my leg just barely. I start to back away. I remember the rules. Don't panic. Keep your cool. Keep your flashlight steady. Move methodically. I move toward the stairs. I need to get out. Maybe the front door, maybe the porch, anywhere outside. But the walls start to pulse. Not literally, but the sound of movement inside them. A slow scraping. Thumps that aren't aligned with any floorboard. Something is alive inside the walls. Watching me. Tracking me. Waiting. I reach the top of the staircase and the air changes. It's colder here. The silence is heavier, almost viscous. I can feel it pressing on my ears. My flashlight flickers. And then the whisper again. Stay. I spin toward the master bedroom. The door is open wider than before, almost inviting me in. I don't want to go. I don't want to see. But something draws me. Something inside me I can't name. Fear, yes. But curiosity. Obligation. The need to know what's making the screams. I step inside. The walls are closer here. Shadows twist unnaturally. My light sweeps across the room and stops on the corner. Something is crouched, still, watching. I swallow. My mouth is dry. My boots scrape the floor. Then it moves. Just a flicker. Just enough to make me scream silently. I raise my flashlight, shake it. My hands tremble. The figure seems to elongate, stretch, smear across the wall. A living shadow folding in on itself. I reach for my radio. Nothing. Dead. I try again, my voice barely more than a whisper. Unit 12, need backup, now! Silence. The walls pulse again, faster this time, like breathing. Like a heartbeat, my own. I take a step back, and I realize I can't leave. Not yet, because it knows I'm here. Because it's not just in the walls. It's in the floors, in the ceilings, in the air pressing against my skin. Watching, waiting, I tell myself to keep moving, to keep the light steady. But every step echoes, bouncing off walls that feel closer and closer, trapping me. Then the whispers become voices, many voices layered over one another. I can't understand the words. I only know the intent. They're aware. They're angry. They want me here. I stumble back toward the stairs. My flashlight flickers, then goes out. Darkness. Pure, suffocating darkness. I can hear it now. Footsteps in the walls. Slow, deliberate circling me. Whispers everywhere, impossibly close, impossibly far. I fumble for the light, shaking. Click, one weak beam. Shadows stretch across the room, twisting, dancing. I can feel them brushing my skin, cold, soft, insistent. The radio is still dead. Dispatch isn't coming. I'm alone, and I know I've crossed some line tonight. The house has noticed. I back down the hallway, my light shaking. Shadows move faster than I can follow, darting in the corners along the floor. The whispers crescendo into something almost audible, almost understandable. You belong here. I spin. Nothing. My mind screams. Fight, run, escape. But the walls pulse with life. My heart is a drumbeat echoing in a tomb, and I realize I can't leave. Not yet, because the house doesn't want me to, and the moment I understood that, I knew. I wasn't just hearing screams anymore. I was listening to them. I was one of them now. I still remember the night the call came in. It was early fall, the kind of night where the air feels thin and sharp, and sound seems to carry a little too far. I was on the late shift, sitting in my cruiser off Highway 12, halfway through a stale cup of coffee when the radio cracked to life. Dispatch said a couple of hikers had come running out of the woods near Miller's Hollow. They swore they heard someone screaming from the old lodge out there. Now, Miller's Hollow wasn't on any of our regular patrol routes. Nobody had stayed in that lodge for decades. The place had been left to rot after a fire gutted half the roof back in the 70s. Everyone in town knew it was there, but no one had any reason to go near it. Kids dared each other, sure. Teenagers liked to sneak out there to drink. But screams? That was new. At first I thought maybe it was just kids messing around. But the hikers had sounded shaken, genuinely scared. And when dispatch said they were grown men in their 40s, not teenagers, I felt that weight settle in my gut. So I drove out there. The further I got from town, the quieter it became. The pine trees closed in on either side of the road, black and endless, and my headlights barely seemed to cut through it. I remember turning the radio off, rolling the window down, and just listening. That silence was heavy, almost pressing. It was the kind of silence where every crack of a branch sounds like a warning. When I pulled up to the trailhead, my partner, Deputy Harris, was already waiting. He leaned against his car with a flashlight in hand, his breath fogging in the cold. He didn't say anything at first, just gave me this look that told me he felt the same unease I did. "You hear the call?" he asked finally. "Yeah," I said. "Couple of guys swear they heard screaming. Said it came from the lodge." I glanced toward the trail, swallowed hard. Guess we'd better check it out. The trail was narrow, barely more than a deer path, winding deeper into the woods. The trees creaked above us, tall enough to block out most of the sky. I kept the flashlight aimed at the ground, watching my boots crunch through layers of pine needles. But every so often, I caught myself looking off into the dark. You know that feeling when you think someone's walking just a step behind you? That's how it felt the whole way. About halfway in, Harris stopped. "Listen," he whispered. We both stood there, flashlights off, holding our breath. At first it was nothing, just the stillness of the forest. And then, faint, far away, there it was. Static. Not voices, not wind, but the unmistakable crackle of static, like an old radio that can't find a signal. It floated between the trees, so thin you could almost convince yourself you imagined it. I felt the hair rise on my arms. "That's not an animal," I muttered. "No," Harris said. "That's coming from the lodge." We moved faster after that, though I can't say why. It felt like the longer we lingered on that trail, the more likely it was that the forest itself would swallow us. When the lodge finally came into view, my chest tightened. Even in the dark, I could see how broken it was. The roof sagged, the windows were black pits, and the porch leaned forward like it wanted to collapse. The whole place seemed wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for us. And then, cutting through the night, we heard it. A scream, high, sharp, and human. It echoed through the pines, bouncing off the walls of the hollow. Harris and I froze where we stood. My first instinct was to run forward, but something in me resisted. The scream didn't sound like someone in danger. It sounded distorted. Drawn out, too long, too perfect. Jesus Christ, Harris whispered. Yeah, I said. My mouth had gone dry. Guess the hikers weren't lying. We edged closer to the lodge, flashlights sweeping across rotting wood and broken shutters. The static came again, louder this time, threading through the trees. It buzzed against my eardrums, made my teeth ache. Then silence, as if it had never been there. I pushed open the broken gate and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight, and I swore I felt something shift beneath my boots, like the house didn't want us there. Call it in? Harris asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Let's check inside first. The front door loomed ahead of us, heavy and swollen from years of rain. My hand hovered near the knob, but I didn't touch it. Something felt off. My flashlight beam slid over the frame, and that's when I saw it. The chain. The door was chained shut. From the inside, I remember staring at it, my mind trying to catch up. If someone was screaming in there, how had they gotten in? And why would they lock themselves inside? Harris swore under his breath. What the hell is this? I didn't answer. My ears were ringing, straining for any sound from within. Then, as if on cue, another scream tore through the hollow. This one was closer, right behind that door. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my throat, but there was no movement inside. No shadows, no footsteps. Just that sound. We circled the house, looking for another way in. Every window was boarded, nailed tight from the inside. The back door was the same, chained. Whoever had sealed this place up had made damn sure nothing was getting out. Or maybe nothing was getting in. The static followed us as we moved, always faint, always just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes it sounded like voices under the crackle, but the words never came through. Once I thought I heard my own name. By the time we made it back to the porch, my nerves were shot. Harris wouldn't stop scanning the tree line, muttering under his breath. I could tell he wanted to leave. Truth be told, so did I. But duty has a way of pushing fear aside. Someone had called for help. At least that's what we thought, and we were supposed to answer. I stood there staring at that chained door when the screaming stopped. It didn't fade. It didn't echo away. It just cut off, sharp and sudden, like someone flipped a switch. And the silence that followed was worse than the noise. The woods held their breath again. The air seemed thicker. Even the crickets had gone quiet. That's when the radio on my belt crackled. Not with dispatch. Not with any voice I recognized. Just static. The same thin, broken static we'd heard in the trees. It bled out of the speaker like a whisper, crawling into the night around us. I ripped it off my belt and held it away from me, heart pounding. Harris stared at it, his face pale. "Turn it off," he hissed. I tried. The knob wouldn't move. The static just kept pouring out, louder, until it was the only sound in the world. And then, faint. Beneath the crackle, I heard it again, a scream. But this time, it was inside the radio. We couldn't leave. I don't think either of us would have, even if we'd tried. The forest had closed in around us, the trees whispering in the wind, warning us. The lodge sat there like a wound in the woods, and I felt drawn toward it, even though every part of my body screamed to turn back. Harris and I circled the building again, testing every window, every weak spot in the boards. Each one was nailed and chained from the inside. Whoever or whatever was in there didn't want to be disturbed. Or maybe it didn't want us in. I leaned against the wall, listening. The silence was suffocating, thick enough to taste. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating splintered wood and decayed shingles, but there was no sign of movement, no hint of life. Yet the sound, the faintest echo of static, of whispering, seeped from the building. It crawled under my skin. Think anyone's actually in there? Harris asked, his voice low. He was holding his flashlight with a trembling hand. I don't know, I said. Doesn't feel like a person. I could see the fear in his eyes, the kind that makes a man desperate. I felt it too. It pressed down in my chest, heavy and unrelenting, but I pushed it aside. I had to know. We had to see what was causing the screams. I tried the door again. The chain was thick, rusty, unyielding. Whoever had put it there had done so carefully, with no intention of it being removed easily. I tugged at it, slammed my shoulder against the door, but it didn't budge. Harris stepped in beside me, and together we strained against it, muscles burning, fingers scraping against the metal. The chain held fast, and then we heard it, a sound from inside the lodge that didn't belong anywhere in the natural world. Not a scream, not a growl, something else. Something that seemed to stretch and bend the air, like it was testing the walls of reality. It reverberated through the door, through my bones, through the ground beneath us. Harris let out a sharp hiss. It's not human. I swallowed, my throat dry. Then what the hell is it? We circled the porch, searching for another way in. The back door was identical, nailed shut, chained from the inside. Windows were all sealed. There was no entrance. No escape. The static grew louder, pulsing in waves. My radio, still clutched in my hand, emitted a high-pitched squeal. I dropped it to the ground, and it skidded across the rotting boards, but the sound didn't stop. It poured out of the lodge itself now, filling the night with its sharp, unbearable hum. I felt it in my head, in my teeth, in the tips of my fingers. The lodge was alive with it. Alive and watching us. We can't just break in, Harris said, voice tight with fear. But I wasn't listening. I was already moving. The need to know, to see, had overtaken every instinct for self-preservation. I pressed my ear against the door. The static hissed. And then voices, faint under the crackle, calling, whispering. My name. I stumbled back. Did you hear that? I gasped. Harris nodded, pale. Yeah, it said our names. I grabbed a crowbar from the back of my cruiser. Metal scraped against wood as I tried to wedge it between the door and the frame. Every strike of the hammer felt wrong. The sound of metal on wood echoed like a scream, and I could swear the lodge pulsed in response, like it was breathing. Finally, with a loud snap, the chain gave way. We both froze, staring at the gap in the door. Nothing moved inside. Just the static, now more concentrated, almost alive. It seemed to beckon us. Ready? Harris whispered. I nodded. We stepped inside together. The air hit us like a wall, cold, damp, and heavy. Dust motes floated in the beam of our flashlights. The smell of rot and smoke clung to the walls. I could see the remnants of the old fire, the charred beams hanging like skeletal fingers from the ceiling. And then I noticed something. The door had swung shut behind us, quietly. But when I tried to open it, locked. From the inside, I spun around. Harris was staring at the door, eyes wide. No, he breathed. It can't, the static screamed in response, filling the room. It wrapped around us, a pressure that made it hard to think. My heart raced, and I felt an almost physical urge to crawl out, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. I checked the windows. Boarded, everyone. Even if we tried to break them, I felt we wouldn't get out. Something didn't want us leaving. Then I noticed the walls. At first they looked ordinary, charred wood, old plaster. But in the flickering light of our flashlights, I began to see shapes, shadows that weren't shadows. Faces pressed faintly into the walls, distorted, screaming silently. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. They were still there. Harris swore again, backing away. This place, it's alive, he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My attention was drawn to the fireplace. The ashes inside it weren't cold. They moved. Subtle at first, like the surface of water rippling, and the static seemed louder there, focused, like it was coming from that one spot. A scream erupted, sudden and loud, so close it felt like it was inside my own skull. My knees buckled, and I fell back against the wall. Harris grabbed my arm, steadying me. The sound didn't fade. It repeated over and over, a broken, echoing chant. We couldn't tell if it was coming from the fireplace, the walls, or from somewhere deeper, buried in the dark. Harris tried the door again. Locked. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but I knew we couldn't. Not yet. Not without finding the source. We moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping every corner. The static shifted with us, whispering, almost alive. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deliberate, like the lodge itself was responding to our movements. And then I saw it, a faint outline of a figure in the corner. Too tall, too thin, not moving, yet somehow present. My breath caught. It wasn't human, not entirely, but it wasn't a shadow either. Something else, something ancient, and it was watching us. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the sound of the static made my words falter. My tongue felt thick, useless. Harris took a step back, tripping over the remnants of the firewood, and I reached out to steady him. We were trapped, inside a house that shouldn't exist in the way it did, with a sound that shouldn't be possible, and something waiting for us in the shadows. And yet, we had to move forward, because whatever had chained the doors from the inside wasn't done with us yet. And we weren't done with it. The air inside the lodge was thick, as if the walls themselves exhaled decay. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, painting long, uneven shadows that danced across the charred wood. Every step I took felt louder than it should, like the building was listening, cataloging, waiting. Harris and I moved cautiously through the main room. The fireplace, which had drawn our attention before, was now a blackened gash in the wall, ash crawling like it had a life of its own. The static hummed low, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. I couldn't stop glancing at the corners, half expecting movement, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. That's when I noticed the mantel. It was strange, almost pristine compared to the rest of the room. Clean wood carved with patterns that had somehow survived the fire and decades of rot, and on it, photographs. I froze. There were a dozen, maybe more, all framed, lined up in a perfect row. And they were old, sepia tones, fading edges, but disturbingly clear. Faces stared back at me. Children, men, women, all smiling. All wrong. Not wrong in the sense of being creepy like Halloween masks. Wrong because I recognized none of them. Not a single one. Not the lodge owners, not anyone in town, not any family I'd ever heard of. Yet they seemed familiar. Harris leaned closer, squinting. Who? Stop, I hissed, cutting him off. My hands were shaking. I couldn't look away. Some instinct, primal and dumb, told me to leave, but I felt glued to the spot. One photograph caught my attention. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, dark hair, eyes too wide, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed to move when I blinked, just the faintest tilt of her head like she was watching me. I shook my head, telling myself it was my imagination, but then I saw the next one. And the next. Every single person in those frames looked at me. Not in the way a photograph looks at you. In the way they knew me. Harris cleared his throat. Deputy, maybe we should... Not yet, I said. My voice was low, trembling. I couldn't explain why I felt I had to see everything, touch everything. The urge wasn't logical. It wasn't reasonable. It was something deeper, older, insistent. I reached out, fingers brushing the edge of one frame. The instant I did, a sound rattled the walls, soft, almost like a sigh or a whisper carried on the static. My hand froze. Harris gripped my shoulder, and I realized I hadn't been breathing. The photographs were moving now. Slightly. A blink here, a shift of the eyes there. Not enough to be real, but too much to be my imagination. I recoiled. I noticed something else. Writing. Faint. Scrawled on the backs of some of the frames, visible only when I tilted them toward the weak light. Names, dates, places, but none of them matched anything I knew. Some of the dates were impossible. A woman born in 1852 smiling in a photograph clearly taken decades later. Children that should have been long dead staring back at me, unaged. I backed away. Harris was pale, eyes darting around the room. This doesn't make sense, he whispered. It can't be real. I nodded, swallowing. My throat was raw. Nothing here makes sense. But then I noticed movement behind me in the shadows. Something flickered just beyond the reach of my flashlight. A shape, darker than dark. My pulse shot. I turned slowly, the beam cutting across the room, and caught nothing. Just the mantle, the photographs, the whispering static that had become almost unbearable. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I had to understand something about the way those people in the photographs stared at me. It wasn't just recognition. It was accusation, blame, and worse, it was expectation. I picked up one frame, the little girl, held it in front of me. The instant I did, the temperature in the room dropped. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. Harris swore again, stepping back, and then I heard it, soft, a whisper just beneath the static. My name, and her voice, the little girl's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Why did you come?" I staggered, nearly dropping the frame. Who's there?" I choked out, no answer. Just the static, buzzing louder, and the feeling that the room itself had leaned in closer. I turned the frame over. More writing, but this time it wasn't names. Just one word, remember. Harris grabbed my arm. "We should go," he said urgently. "Right now." I didn't move. The photographs were shifting again, subtle now, but noticeable. Faces tilting, eyes following, mouths twisting into silent screams. I could feel them reaching out through the glass, through the wood, through the years. They wanted something. I didn't know what, but I felt it. Then I noticed the edges of the mantle. Small scratches, gouges in the wood, almost claw marks. They weren't fresh. They were old, decades old, but freshly deepened somehow, as if the house remembered us and responded. My flashlight flickered. Panic rose in my chest. Harris shoved me. "Enough! We're leaving. Now!" I spun toward the door. Locked, of course. It had locked behind us again. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. We were trapped inside, surrounded by static, shadows, and photographs of people who had no reason to exist, and yet did. And then I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, taller than any human, slithering along the far wall. Not solid, not smoke, just something. My stomach churned. It wasn't coming toward us yet, just observing, waiting. I grabbed the little girl's photograph. Something compelled me, something primal. I held it in front of me. The whispering static intensified, filling the room, vibrating through my teeth, my skull, my heart. Her eyes in the photograph widened. She was no longer smiling. The first tear I'd shed in years came unbidden, rolling down my cheek. I felt a wave of guilt, fear, and an emotion I couldn't name. The lodge seemed to lean closer, the walls creaking as if listening. Harris tried to grab me. Don't touch them!" But I couldn't stop. I needed to know why. Why these faces? Why this place? Why the screaming we had heard? The photographs were the first clue, the first thread connecting everything. And then it happened. A sound. Not a scream this time. Something deeper, more resonant, coming from the fireplace again. A low rumble, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through my chest. The ash stirred as though alive. And with it, a faint outline appeared. A shadow pooling at the hearth. I could feel its eyes on me without seeing them. And I understood. It knew we were there. It knew we were looking at the photographs. It knew I stumbled back. Harris tried the door again. Locked. I could see the panic in his eyes, mirrored in my own. We were inside, trapped, watched, and the house itself seemed to pulse with a hunger I couldn't comprehend. The static reached a crescendo. I dropped the photograph, backing toward the far wall. Faces on the mantel shifted one last time before freezing again, as if satisfied we had seen, or angry we had looked too long, and then, in the quiet that followed, I heard it. A whisper, low, crawling through the static, through the floorboards, through my skull. "You shouldn't have come. We were frozen." The room seemed to grow taller, the shadows stretching, bending. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The photographs stared. The static hummed. The lodge waited, and I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The room grew colder. Not just the cold of night or old wood, but a cold that clawed under my skin, threading through my bones. The static in the walls had settled into a low, almost melodic hum, like it was breathing along with us, waiting. Every shadow seemed alive, and every photograph on the mantel felt like it was watching, silently judging us. Harris was pale, gripping his flashlight so hard his knuckles were white. He hadn't spoken since the whisper in the static. Neither had I. We were both frozen in that oppressive, heavy silence, listening. Then it started. From the fireplace, a sound. Low at first, like air escaping from a hidden pipe, but gradually twisting, deepening into something unnatural. My flashlight beam hit the hearth and I could see it, the ashes rising. Not drifting, not blowing with the stale air, but climbing, swirling as though pulled upward by a hidden force. I felt the room shift, subtle but undeniable. The floor beneath my boots vibrated like the lodge itself was stirring awake. Harris whispered something I couldn't hear. I didn't need him to. The presence in the hearth was impossible. Something was moving inside the chimney. I stepped closer, drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity I couldn't name. The closer I got, the more the soot seemed alive, writhing, thickening in shapes that didn't belong in reality. Shadows pressed out from the corners of the fireplace, stretching across the walls like long, reaching fingers. Harris grabbed my shoulder. "Don't, just don't," he said. But I couldn't stop. The sound from the chimney changed. It was no longer wind, no longer air. It was something alive, something intelligent. A scraping, a scratching, and then a hiss. Low, guttural, but distinctly intelligent. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. My stomach churned, but I edged closer, straining to see through the black smoke of the soot. The fire pit had long been cold, yet the blackness inside it seemed to pulse, undulating as though it had its own heartbeat. And then I saw it. A face. Not a human face, at least not entirely. It was elongated, wet-looking, eyes impossibly dark, staring down from the chimney like it had been waiting for decades. Its mouth opened slowly, but no sound came. Only the static, rising and rising, as though the sound itself couldn't contain what wanted to speak. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sound flinched, and I could feel it in my chest, a vibration, a pressure. The air smelled of burnt wood, sulfur, and something sweet, rotting at the same time. My hands shook, and I realized I was holding my flashlight so tight it might snap in half. Harris was screaming now, not out loud, but a choked, strangled noise of panic. "We need to get out now!" I tried the door, locked, of course. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my ears. The chimney face tilted its head slowly like it was examining us. The soot poured out like liquid, black tendrils curling along the floor toward us. Each tendril moved with purpose, deliberate, aware. I could hear whispers in the static, overlapping, layering voices that weren't human, yet somehow familiar. My flashlight flickered. I dropped it. The room was bathed in shadows, soot crawling, the thing in the chimney stretching, elongating into the room. It was no longer just in the hearth. The ceiling trembled. I could feel something ancient pressing down, compressing the air, making every breath a struggle. Harris grabbed my arm again. "We're done. We are done. We have to leave." I wanted to obey. My legs felt like they were cement. But something about the mantle, the photographs, the whispers, I couldn't leave. I was trapped in more ways than one. Physically, yes, but also in some unspoken, older contract that I hadn't signed but couldn't break. Then the soot fell, not lightly, like dust, but in sheets like ash from a collapsed roof. And within it, shapes, faces pressed and twisted, screaming silently, clawing at the edges of reality. The whispers became words, one after another, sharp and urgent. "You opened it. You shouldn't have. We waited for you. It's hungry." The tendrils surged closer. I could feel them brushing against my clothes, my skin, leaving a sting like static electricity multiplied 100-fold. The thing in the chimney shifted again, impossibly fast this time, and the soot rained down with it. Harris screamed. He tried to push past me, toward the back door, but the tendrils held him in place. I could feel them wrapping around me too, pulling, almost laughing. Not literally, of course, but the sensation of malice was undeniable. And then the impossible happened. From the fireplace, the thing spoke. Not in words, not in sounds. It was in my head, deep in my skull, a vibration that bypassed language entirely. It made me see images, decades of decay, of people entering the lodge, of chains closing behind them, of screams swallowed into the blackness of the hearth. And me standing there, watching, listening. The static was all I could hear, and then it stopped. Silence, absolute. The soot settled. The tendrils vanished. The figure in the chimney was gone. The photographs on the mantel hung inert, lifeless again. The only sound was our ragged breathing, echoing in the hollowed room. I looked at Harris. He was shaking uncontrollably, staring at nothing. I wanted to speak, to say something rational, to convince us both we hadn't just been pulled into some nightmare, but the words wouldn't come. We were alive. But we were changed. The lodge didn't feel empty anymore. It felt patient, aware, as if it had merely paused, waiting for us to understand our place in it. And I understood nothing. I knew one thing. The chimney had been a doorway. Not for us, not yet, but for something else. And if we stayed, we would see it again. We spent hours in that room after the event, unable to leave. Every so often, the static returned, so faint I could almost convince myself it wasn't there. But it was enough to remind us that the lodge was alive, and that it remembered everything. Finally, when the dawn began to fracture through the broken windows, we forced ourselves outside. The air never felt cleaner, but I could still feel the weight of the lodge behind me, pressing, reminding, haunting. We didn't speak much on the way back. There was nothing to say. The forest seemed calmer, the road familiar, but both of us knew we had been changed. And I knew, deep down, that the fireplace was only a beginning. Whatever waited in that hollow, in that lodge, it was patient. It could wait centuries if it had to, and when it called next, we would answer. I don't remember how long we stayed in the lodge after the thing in the chimney. Time lost meaning in that place. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been days. The static whispered constantly, crawling into our skulls, filling every empty space with words, half-words, and screams that had no source. Harris refused to speak. I couldn't make myself either. We were both prisoners of the building, though neither of us realized it fully yet. When we finally tried to leave, the doors didn't open. Not from the inside, not from the outside. They were locked, chained, sealed, as if the lodge had grown solid around us while we slept. Or didn't sleep, because sleep had become impossible. The air was thick, heavy, and alive. Every step we took creaked against unseen forces. Every shadow moved against us. I remember looking at the mantel again. The photographs had changed. Faces twisted into expressions of anger, fear, despair. Some of them looked relieved. It was impossible, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I realized then that the lodge wasn't just alive, it was sentient, and we had trespassed in the worst possible way. The fireplace began to stir again, faintly at first. A trickle of soot fell to the floor, then more, until the ash formed patterns that weren't random. Lines, symbols, shapes. I couldn't read them, but I felt them, deep in my chest, in my bones. They were calling something, someone, or something. Harris grabbed my arm. His grip was desperate, trembling. We shouldn't have... He didn't finish. His eyes were wide with panic, reflecting the shadows that shifted across the walls. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I could feel it too. Something in the lodge had awoken fully. Something old. Something hungry. The static screamed louder, filling the room, filling my head. The air vibrated with it until it felt like my teeth were splitting. And then it happened. The fireplace erupted. Not fire, not smoke. Something poured from it. A black, viscous shape, writhing, pulsing, and alive. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't shadow. It wasn't solid. It was all of it. And it moved with intent. Harris screamed. I tried to grab him, but the thing in the hearth didn't move toward him. Not at first. It moved toward me. I could feel its intelligence. It knew me. It knew me. Every fear, every failure, every memory I tried to bury. It seeped into me like water into sand, filling every hollow. I fell back against the wall, clutching my head, trying to block it out. The static became words, screaming, hissing, whispering. You opened it. You shouldn't have opened it. It waited for you. You brought it here. I realized then that we hadn't just discovered the lodge. We had awakened it, stirred it, and it had been waiting, patient for decades, maybe centuries, for someone foolish enough to disturb it. The thing expanded, stretching toward the ceiling. The soot turned into forms, faces, hands, mouths, all pressing toward us. I could see memories not my own. People entering the lodge, chains locking, screaming, disappearing into nothing. And now it wanted us too. Harris was screaming. I tried to pull him toward the door, but it was useless. The lodge itself resisted. Shadows wrapped around our legs, dragging us back, anchoring us to the floor. The photographs on the mantel shook violently, some tumbling to the ground, with faces still frozen in silent horror. I realized I was screaming too, but the sound didn't leave my throat. It vibrated inside me, echoed back by the lodge, until it felt like my voice was being torn apart. The black shape from the fireplace reached me, tendrils brushing my skin, leaving trails of cold fire in their wake. And then I saw it. A form emerged, impossibly vast, impossible to define. Not human, not beast, not shadow. It was all at once, constantly shifting, a void with eyes, mouths, and limbs that twisted in ways that made me question physics. And it looked directly at me, through me, into me. I felt my sanity slipping. My own thoughts weren't my own anymore. They weren't private. The thing knew them, folded them, twisted them, fed off them. Every memory of my life, every secret, every fear, it devoured them. And it was hungry for more. I tried to fight. I tried to move. I tried to scream. But my body was useless. Harris was screaming beside me, but I couldn't help him. The thing reached out, and for a moment I thought I would disappear too, swallowed entirely by darkness. Then, a voice, my own voice, or maybe not, echoing, coming from somewhere inside the lodge, inside the walls, inside the air itself. We shouldn't have opened it. The words hit me like a hammer, and suddenly, just for a second, everything stopped. The static vanished. The shadows froze. The lodge held its breath. I was gasping, drenched in sweat, shaking. Harris was silent, staring at nothing. The black form in the fireplace pulsed, then recoiled, retreating back into the hearth, leaving only soot. The photographs hung still again. The air felt lighter, but I knew it wasn't over. I don't know how long we sat there in silence, too afraid to speak. The lodge seemed patient, watching as if it had learned something from us, learned that we had dared to enter, learned that we had survived barely. When we finally forced the doors open, the outside air hit us like a wave. The forest had returned to normal, quiet, still. But the lodge behind us felt alive, as if it were breathing, waiting, remembering. Harris didn't speak. I didn't speak. We didn't drive back immediately. We sat on the edge of the forest, shaking, staring at the lodge. I knew we had seen something that would follow us forever. Something that didn't belong in this world, yet existed anyway. When we finally drove back to town, it was daylight. The sun felt harsh, too bright. I remember looking in the rearview mirror, expecting shadows, tendrils, faces, but there was nothing. The lodge was just a building again, rotten, decayed, but normal. I tried to tell myself it was over, tried to convince myself it had only been a hallucination, a trick of stress and fear. But deep down, I knew better. At home that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the creaking house, the distant bark of a dog made me flinch. And sometimes, just sometimes, I could hear it. That faint static whispering my name, promising it was still waiting. Harris called the next day. His voice was hollow, strained. "I can't stop seeing it," he said. "I hear it everywhere. I think it followed us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I heard it too. In the hum of the fridge, in the crackle of the radio, in the silence of my apartment. Always there. Waiting. Patient. I've never returned to the lodge. I never will. But I think about it constantly. I see the faces in the photographs when I close my eyes. I hear the whispers beneath the static. I know now that some things are better left alone. Some doors are better left unopened. And yet, I can't stop thinking about it, because I know the lodge remembers us, and it will call again. I just pray I'm not the first to answer. My shift started the same way it always did. Fluorescent lights. Humming above, The low buzz of other dispatchers talking into their headsets, and the stale smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. It was just another night at the 911 call center. I've worked the night shift for years, and there's a rhythm to it, a pattern you fall into. Most of the calls blur together: car accidents, domestic fights, the occasional prank. You hear the worst moments of people's lives, one after another, until your own life starts to feel numb. That night, it was a Tuesday, I think. The kind of night where time stretches. Midnight had just passed, and the screens in front of me glowed against the darkened glass of the room. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet where you almost wish for a call, just to remind yourself you're awake. And then, the phone lit up. The screen displayed an address. An ordinary two-story house in a part of town I vaguely knew. Suburban, nothing special. The ID didn't show a name, just caller unknown. I answered the way I always do. 1. What's your emergency? For a few seconds, there was only static. A crackling hiss, like a weak signal on a radio. I almost thought the line had dropped when I heard it. Faint, muffled. A voice. Help. Please. The words were broken, almost swallowed by the static, but I heard them. A man's voice. Desperate. Weak. Sir, can you repeat that? I leaned forward, pressing my headset tighter against my ear. What's your emergency? There was silence. Then again. They won't let me out. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. His tone was low, like he was speaking through a cloth or from far away. Every word was strained. Sir, where are you right now? I asked, already glancing at the address on my monitor. His answer chilled me. Here. The house. Basement. I froze for a second, staring at the screen. The address was clear. A house on Brookwood Lane. I typed it into the system and waited for the property details to load. The report came back in bold letters. Foreclosed. Vacant. 2 years. I swallowed hard. Sir, are you injured? Do you need medical help? He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. The line crackled again, and I caught pieces of words. Dark, cold, they're down here. My stomach knotted. I waved at my supervisor across the room and mouthed, "Trace this call." She frowned but began typing. I forced my voice to stay calm. Who's with you? Can you tell me your name? No answer. Just a long, slow breath. Then, almost too quiet to hear. Don't let them open the door. I felt the blood drain from my face. What door? Sir, I need you to explain. But before I could press him further, the line erupted with a burst of static. Louder, harsher, like someone dragging nails across a microphone. I yanked the headset back instinctively. When the noise faded, the line went dead. I sat there staring at the empty signal on my screen, heart pounding. Normally, you'd think it was a prank. We get them all the time. Kids, bored teenagers, even drunks who think it's funny to scare a dispatcher. But this didn't feel like that. His voice, it was too broken, too real. My supervisor walked over, her face pale. The system can't trace it. The number doesn't exist. I pointed to the address still glowing on my screen. It came from here, Brookwood Lane. She shook her head. That property's been empty for years. Power's cut. No phone service. I didn't know what to say. Calls don't just come from nowhere. They don't just appear. Still, protocol is protocol. We dispatched a unit. 2 officers. They'd check the property, make sure no squatters had broken in. No one was hurt, and that should have been the end of it. But the silence after that call was heavier than before. Every second dragged, and I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. They won't let me out. Don't let them open the door. Half an hour passed. The officers called back. Their voices were calm, casual. They said the house was dark, windows boarded, locks intact. No sign of entry. No movement. Nothing. Place is empty, one of them said. Looks like it's been empty a long time. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to check the box, log the call, and move on. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard someone who was truly trapped. I played the recording back later, after the shift quieted down. Dispatch. Saves everything. So I pulled the file, slipped on my headset, and pressed play. At first it was what I remembered, the static, the faint voice. But listening again, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background of his words, under the static, there were other sounds. Faint, almost impossible to catch unless you were listening for them. Children, not laughing, not playing, whispering. Quick, sharp breaths, like a group of kids huddled together trying not to be heard. I took the headset off, heart hammering. I told myself it was bleed-through from another line. Interference. A glitch. But in the pit of my stomach, I didn't believe it. That was just the first call, and it wasn't the last. The morning after that first call, I couldn't shake it. I kept seeing the house in my mind, the boarded windows, the dead lawn, the way the darkness seemed to stretch through every corner of that empty structure. I was supposed to log it and move on. Callers vanish all the time. Pranks, mistakes, false alarms. But this felt different. I sat in my chair, staring at the quiet screens of the dispatch center. The room was dim, fluorescent lights flickering ever so slightly above. Every so often, another dispatcher would glance over, give a half smile, and continue typing. But no one mentioned the call from last night. I couldn't tell if that was relief or fear. I replayed the recording again. The voice, the whispered warning, the muffled children. I listened for hours. Patterns. Anything to explain it. And then, for the first time, I noticed the timing of the breaths, the uneven pauses. The static wasn't random. It had rhythm, almost deliberate. By the time I realized what I was thinking, my hands were shaking. I had to trace it. I had to know where it came from. We started with the basics, the phone number, the line, the address. But as expected, the system came up empty. Caller unknown was right. There was no registered line to that house. Not now, not ever, according to the records. Phone service had been disconnected 2 years ago when the foreclosure went through. I felt my stomach twist. The dispatcher in me was screaming, "It's impossible." But the part of me that listened, really listened to his voice, whispered, "He's real." I requested the officers to recheck the property. I asked if they noticed anything unusual the first time around. Nothing. Just the usual dust, the rotting porch, the silence of a house that had been left to rot. Still, my gut told me something was wrong. Something deeper. So we tried another approach, signal tracing. Normally, it's easy. You follow the phone line, the cell tower pings. You pinpoint the location. But when we tried to trace the call, the system failed. Every attempt ended with the same result. No active line. No signal detected. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My headset felt heavier than ever. My coworkers moved around me, answering calls about barking dogs, car accidents, minor thefts. Life went on outside the walls of the call center. But for me, that house on Brookwood Lane didn't exist yet consumed all my attention. Finally, the department brought in a tech specialist, a quiet man named Harris, always calm, always precise. He had a knack for solving the impossible, and when I explained the call, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He just nodded. "I'll try a physical trace," he said, eyes narrowing. "We'll go to the property with the equipment, see if there's anything picking up a signal." We arrived in the early afternoon. The sky was gray, clouds low and heavy, like they were pressing down on the house. I parked a block away and walked slowly toward the yard. Every step felt heavier. Even before we reached the front door, I could feel it. The weight of abandonment, decay, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat loud. Harris set up his gear. A small device, wires running into a tablet, scanners clicking softly as they moved across the property. He moved methodically, slowly, as if afraid to disturb whatever lingered. I watched from a distance. My phone was off in my pocket. I didn't want anything to interfere. I only wanted to hear the truth. Hours passed. Nothing. No signal. No interference. No trace of a call. Not even residual data. According to every piece of equipment we had, the house was dead. Completely empty, I felt my chest tighten. And then faintly, almost too soft to hear over the wind, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't coming from the scanner. It was inside me. Or at least it sounded that way. Help. I froze. My fingers clenched. I thought I was imagining it. My rational mind told me impossible. But my gut, my memory of the night before, screamed real. I turned to Harris. He didn't hear it. Of course he didn't. He was methodical, objective, immune to fear. I wanted to run, to leave, but curiosity rooted me in place. Harris finally sighed. Nothing here. No signal, no line. Your caller may have been hallucinating, or someone is playing a very elaborate prank. I wanted to argue, to tell him I heard it. I knew it was real, but I didn't. Because deep down, I feared that saying it out loud would make it worse. That night, back at the dispatch center, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the screens. The house on Brookwood Lane haunted me. I kept the call recording open on one monitor, playing it softly, listening, learning, trying to understand the rhythm in the static. And then it happened. The second call, same number, same address, same empty label. I froze, headset in hand, heart hammering like a drum. 911, what's your emergency? I said, my voice tighter than I expected. Nothing at first, just that same faint static. Then, the whisper, they're here, waiting. I swallowed hard. My eyes went wide. This was not a repeat prank, not an accident. It was him, the man in the basement. And now, he sounded worse, panicked, terrified. I reached for the trace function again, desperate. But the line, like the first time, vanished the moment I tried. No signal, no route, nothing. Just silence. My hands trembled. The other dispatchers glanced at me, but I smiled weakly, not telling them what I knew. They wouldn't understand. No one would, I knew it then. The house on Brookwood Lane wasn't empty. Not really. And whoever, or whatever, was in the basement. They weren't letting him go. For hours I listened, replayed, and stared. The children's whispers had returned, softer now, almost teasing, almost coaxing. I couldn't make out words, but the pattern was there. Quick, sharp breaths moving from room to room, like shadows that don't belong to anyone. I wrote it down, every sound, every pause, every static crackle. I had to. I couldn't trust myself to remember it all. The fear made details slippery, like sand slipping through fingers. By the time my shift ended, I had convinced myself of one thing. We were chasing a phantom, something old, something that shouldn't exist. But the voice, that desperate voice, it was proof. Someone was down there, trapped. And worse, I knew if anyone opened that basement door, we'd find nothing. Nothing at all, except maybe, when the call comes again, another voice, another whisper, another warning. I went home that morning and didn't sleep. I couldn't. The faces of those children, or were they memories? Haunted the corners of my room. I kept imagining eyes watching from the dark, waiting for someone to cross the threshold. And I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because the signal didn't end. It was waiting for us, for anyone who dared answer. I don't remember how I got through that day. Coffee cups multiplied on my desk, and the phones never stopped ringing. But in the back of my mind, every call, no matter how mundane, felt like it was leading me back to that house on Brookwood Lane. By the time the officers called me, it was dark outside. I could see my own reflection in the computer screen. Tired eyes, pale skin, dark shadows under them. I could hear the faint hum of the center, but my world had shrunk to that house, to that voice, and the basement door. "Dispatch," one of the officers said, voice low. "We're at the property," I swallowed. I could hear the fear in my own throat. "Be careful," I said, though I already knew they would. Anything unusual, anything at all? "Call immediately." They assured me, calm and professional, but I didn't believe it. They started outside, circling the perimeter. Broken fences, peeling paint, dead leaves piled against the foundation. I could picture it all, the way the porch sagged, the way shadows pooled in corners, swallowing shapes whole. Finally, they moved to the front door. One officer pressed the bell, no chime. The wood groaned as they pushed it open. "Clear so far," one of them whispered into the radio. I tried to stay calm, listen to every step. I could hear their boots creak over the old hardwood floor, smell the must and decay through the phone line, as if my senses had crossed into theirs. Then they found it. The basement door. Heavy wooden, old. I could hear the lock mechanism as they twisted it slowly, carefully. The officer holding the flashlight stepped back, shining the beam across the walls. Dust motes floated in the light, moving like tiny ghosts. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. My headset felt impossibly heavy. "Here goes nothing," one officer said. They opened it. The hinges groaned, a long, slow, tortured sound. I waited, heart-thudding, for the worst, for screams, for something alive to lunge at them. But nothing came. Just a thick darkness that swallowed the flashlight beam. "Basement looks empty," the officer said. "Just dust. Old toys, some boxes." I tried to breathe. Relief was close enough to touch, but it tasted wrong. My gut twisted, telling me something wasn't right. How could a man have been trapped here if the basement looked like this? "Check every corner," I urged, voice tight. Every corner. They moved slowly, scanning. A doll, its head cracked, lay on the floor. Blocks scattered as if a child had left in a hurry. But there was no one. Nothing. I felt foolish. My pulse slowed. I told myself I'd been chasing shadows. The voice, the whispers, the fear, it was all in my head. And then I heard it. A ringing. Not from my headset. Not from the line we had traced. But down there, deep in the basement, the old phone sitting on a cracked table rang. Sharp, loud, insistent. I froze. My stomach turned. My hands gripped the edge of my desk. "Do you hear that?" I whispered into the headset, barely believing it myself. The officers hesitated. One reached for the phone, lifting the receiver slowly like it was a snake ready to bite. I could hear his breathing over the line, shallow, fast. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him to leave it, run, anything, but my voice stuck. The ringing stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating. Then a voice, faint, barely audible, came from the receiver. "Don't answer." I jumped in my chair. My pulse raced. The officer held the phone, eyes wide. The other one moved closer, flashlight shaking in his grip. The line went dead. I could feel it, even through the radio. The house itself seemed to breathe, slow and heavy, like it was aware of every move. The toys, the dust, the shadows, they weren't just remnants of the past. They were alive in some way, waiting. I didn't know if it was the man from the call or the children whose whispers I'd heard or something older. Something that didn't belong in the world anymore. But whatever it was, it wanted to be left alone. "Dispatch," one officer said, voice trembling. We're leaving." I didn't argue. I couldn't. I told them to leave immediately, and they did. Afterward, I sat in the call center, staring at the phone. The line was dead, the monitors glowing softly, and yet I could still hear it, faintly, almost at the edge of my hearing. The whispers, the static, the soft begging of someone who couldn't get out. I never went back to that house. The foreclosure is still empty, they say. The city keeps it boarded and abandoned, a place people drive by and avoid. But I know it isn't empty. I know the basement door holds something waiting, something patient. Something that waits for the sound of a voice, for the click of a lock, for someone who dares to answer. And sometimes, when the phones go silent and the center is dark, I swear I can hear it. Just faint enough to doubt myself, just soft enough to wonder if I'm imagining it. "Don't answer." I never will. I shouldn't have laughed, but I did anyway. Patrol cars idling, radios crackling with background chatter, the hum of the city at night. It all felt lighter when I was with him. My partner Jensen leaned back in his seat, feet up on the dashboard, and grinned. "Haunted calls," he said, shaking his head. "That's what they're calling these welfare checks now. Ghost stories for cops. Bet you anything, if we go to the next one, there'll be a black cat and a swinging chandelier." I chuckled. but my laugh felt hollow in the car. The streetlights flickered outside like nervous thoughts. "You really think these places are haunted?" I asked. He shrugged, one shoulder brushing the door. "Doesn't matter if I think they're haunted. Some of these old houses. The vibes alone are enough. People forget how heavy silence can feel when it's been sitting in a place for decades." I glanced at him, at the way his eyes caught the dim dashboard light. Jensen wasn't one to spook easily. That's why I liked him. He made the long, late-night shifts tolerable, even enjoyable in that sick, sarcastic way that only a good partner could. "All right," he said suddenly, sitting up straight. "Enough philosophizing about haunted houses. We've got a welfare check to do," I groaned, rubbing my neck. It had been a long week, and this call wasn't even particularly urgent. Just a neighbor worried about an old man who hadn't been seen in days. Standard, mundane, probably nothing. But Jensen, he thrived on this stuff. The small thrill of entering a quiet house where someone might just be asleep, or worse, where someone might need us, he liked it. He always liked it more than I did. We pulled up to the street. The houses here were older, the kind that leaned a little too far to one side, their paint peeling like dried skin. The wind rustled through the branches, though it wasn't particularly windy tonight. Shadows pooled beneath the street lamps, thick and dark. "Ah, look at that," Jensen said, nodding at a particularly decrepit house at the end of the block. "This one's a winner. 2 stories, attic, sagging roof. You can almost smell the history in it." I laughed, partly to hide the knot forming in my stomach. "You sound like you're auditioning for a ghost show. Should I call the Haunted House Network and get you a deal?" He snorted. "Better. I'd get top billing. The patrolman who talks to ghosts." I rolled my eyes but followed him out of the car. The air was warmer than I expected, sticky with late summer humidity, but even from the driveway, the house gave off a cold vibe, subtle but undeniable. Jensen rapped his knuckles on the door. "Mr. Callahan? This is the city police. Are you home?" His voice was loud enough to echo faintly in the empty street, swallowed up by the quiet that seemed too thick for a neighborhood like this. There was no answer, no shuffling, no creaking from inside, just silence. "Maybe he's sleeping," I muttered, though the hair on my arms was starting to prickle. "Maybe." Jensen grinned, clearly enjoying the suspense. "Or maybe the ghost of a long-dead relative doesn't like strangers coming in." I groaned again and crossed my arms, the chill from the shadows brushing over me even in the warm night. Jensen fished a flashlight out of his jacket, the beam cutting through the darkness like a small sword. "Door's unlocked," he said after a moment, glancing at me. "Lucky us." I felt that same hollow laugh rising again. "Lucky us," I echoed. The air inside hit me the moment the door swung open. It was still, not just quiet, but like time itself had slowed. Pressed down over the furniture, the dust motes dancing in the flashlight beam like tiny ghosts. Jensen stepped inside, moving with that casual confidence I trusted too much. "See? Nothing to worry about. Probably just a napper." I followed, eyes scanning every corner, my ears straining for anything that didn't belong. The furniture was old, covered in dust sheets. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and the smell of damp wood and mildew hit me squarely in the chest. Jensen whispered almost to himself, "God, you can feel the years here, decades of living, of leaving, all compressed into a single moment of silence." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was just an old house, but something about the way he said it made me pause. The words hung there, heavy, and I swallowed hard. We moved through the living room, and I noticed the faint chill brushing over my skin, creeping along my neck and hands. It didn't make sense. Outside, it was sweltering. Inside, it felt like winter had taken root. Jensen stopped in front of a hallway leading deeper into the house. "All right," he said, tone light but carrying that familiar edge of anticipation. "Let's see if Mr. Callahan is napping in the back." "Stay close," I nodded, gripping my flashlight a little tighter. I felt ridiculous for being nervous. It was just an old man, probably asleep in his recliner, maybe with the TV on low. Nothing haunted, nothing supernatural, just quiet. We moved down the hall. Every creak of the floorboards beneath our boots sounded louder than it should have. Shadows shifted as our flashlights passed over the walls. Paint peeled in long strips, and the wallpaper had curled at the edges like curling fingernails. Ever think about how houses hold memories? Jensen asked suddenly, stopping mid-step. All the laughter, the arguments, the little tragedies, it doesn't disappear. Not really. Just hides behind the walls. I swallowed, feeling that chill again. That's poetic, I muttered, not sure if I meant it. He smirked. Just don't let it get to you, or do. Makes the night more fun. Finally, we reached the kitchen. No lights on. The air smelled faintly of spoiled milk and old wood. No sign of anyone. Callahan? Jensen called softly, stepping closer to the back door. Mr. Callahan, it's the police. Nothing. Just that quiet, pressing silence like the house was holding its breath. Jensen laughed, a low, almost nervous sound. Well, he's not answering. Maybe he really is napping, or maybe he just doesn't want to be found. I nodded, heart still racing a little. Yeah, or maybe he went out earlier. Could be at a diner, or he's part of the haunted call myth, Jensen interrupted with a wink. Imagine that. We're standing here calling into the ether and the old man's just not there, gone. Ghost or not, that's our story for the log tonight. I forced a smile. Ghost or not, I hope we find him soon. Jensen's eyes flicked to me for a moment, a shadow passing over his grin. Don't worry. We always do. But as we stood there, the silence felt heavier. My flashlight flickered briefly, or maybe it was just my eyes adjusting. I could swear the shadows were moving in ways they shouldn't. He didn't notice, too caught up in the humor, the bravado. I wanted to tell him to slow down, to be careful, but my words stuck in my throat. There was nothing wrong, I told myself. Nothing at all. Yet even as I followed him toward the stairs leading upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Something patient, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. Jensen, ever oblivious to the dread creeping along my spine, tapped his flashlight against the banister. All right, upstairs we go. You ready for the grand tour of a haunted farm or house? I nodded, voice tighter than I intended. Yeah, ready. But inside, the quiet had grown thick and sticky, pressing in around me. I just didn't know it yet. The air hit me the moment we stepped inside the farmhouse. Not the kind of air you expect on a summer night. It wasn't warm or sticky. It was cold. Deep, biting cold that crawled under my shirt and made the hairs on my arms rise. I shivered, even though the humidity outside had been thick enough to drown in. Jensen, of course, didn't notice at first. He stepped past the threshold like he always did, boots clicking softly on the warped wooden floorboards. See? Nothing to worry about, he said, flashing that infuriating grin. Old houses just breathe differently. You get used to it. I didn't get used to it. Not yet. The door behind us creaked in the breeze. Or maybe it was the house itself settling, and I thought about locking it. But Jensen waved me off. Doors swinging in the wind, that's all, he said. We're not in some horror movie. Yet, I swallowed and followed him. The house smelled of old wood, mildew, and something else I couldn't name. Metallic, sharp, like iron left to rust in water. My stomach churned slightly, the smell clawing at some memory I couldn't place. We moved through the living room, flashlight beams cutting slices of light through the darkness. Dust floated in the beams, thick enough to make it feel almost solid. I caught the edge of a broken picture frame on the wall. The photo faded to near white, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure in it, moving just a fraction too fast. I blinked, and it was gone. Jensen stepped ahead, taking the hallway toward the back. He probably just went out earlier, he said casually. Or maybe he's napping upstairs. Either way, we'll check the whole place. Standard procedure. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. Standard procedure? Sure. But standard procedure never made your teeth chatter in the middle of a sweltering summer night. The hallway was narrower than the living room, walls lined with old wallpaper curling at the edges. My flashlight beam caught the patterns, twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. Faces maybe, or hands. I couldn't tell. I shook my head, trying to force the unease away. Jensen stopped suddenly in front of the kitchen door. The handle was cold beneath his hand, colder than it should have been for metal left in a house that had felt warm moments ago. He twisted it open. The room hit me like a wall, freezing. Not just a draft or a gust through a cracked window. This was unnatural cold, the kind that made your bones ache. My breath came out in little white puffs. I could see them against the dull gray light filtering in through the grimy windows. "What the hell?" I whispered. Jensen, still calm, still grinning, stepped in. "Feels colder than it should, huh? Weird for July. Old pipes? Poor insulation?" I shook my head, teeth chattering. "No, it's something else. This isn't normal." He waved me off. "Come on. Maybe the old man keeps the AC on ice even when he's out." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the chill didn't feel like air conditioning. It felt alive, like the house itself was breathing around us, cold fingers sliding across my skin. We moved deeper into the narrow hallway leading to the back rooms. Each step made the wooden boards groan under our weight. I was hyper-aware of the quiet around us now, the kind of quiet that presses into your ears and makes your heartbeat echo. "Maybe he's upstairs," Jensen said after a moment, looking up at the ceiling like he could see through it. "Attic? Spare room? One of these places?" I hesitated. Attics have a way of holding things, memories, dust, and sometimes other things. My gut tightened. "Upstairs? Yeah, maybe. But I don't know. This place feels off." Jensen laughed softly. "You always say that. Every old house feels off to you. Trust me, nothing's wrong. It's just old." I didn't reply. I didn't want to. I couldn't. Something in me screamed, low and persistent, that we weren't alone, that this house had been waiting for someone to come inside, waiting and watching. We reached the staircase. The wooden steps groaned under our boots. I held on to the railing, feeling the splinters bite into my palm, and tried to keep my breathing steady. Jensen went first, flashlight sweeping the darkened corners. Halfway up, I paused. The air was colder here, colder than the first floor, and I could see my breath in sharp little clouds. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Nothing. Just the shadows playing tricks. Jensen reached the top and called down. "All clear so far." "Maybe he's hiding, trying to scare us." Classic old man humor. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him he was ridiculous. But the hairs on my neck stood on end, and a tight knot formed in my chest. Something was here. Something that didn't belong. We moved down the hallway, doors lining each side, most closed, one ajar. Cold air seeped out from the crack in the open door. I stopped in front of it. My flashlight revealed an old bedroom, curtains drawn over dusty windows. The air inside was like ice. Jensen stepped in, flashlight illuminating the room. Still nothing. "Maybe he's—" "Oh, hell," he muttered, pointing to the far corner. I followed his gaze. A chair sat facing the wall, back straight, nothing unusual. But the shadow it cast stretched impossibly long across the floor. It wasn't right. The lines of the shadow didn't match the light. I shivered. "That's not normal," Jensen frowned. "It's just the angle. Old houses, crooked floors. Don't let it freak you out." But I couldn't shake it. My gut twisted in that old primal way. We weren't alone. We checked the rest of the rooms. Each one colder than the last, each one pressing in on me more than the previous. My flashlight caught glimpses of things I didn't want to see. Shapes in the corner of the rooms, shadows that moved when I blinked. Dust disturbed in patterns I hadn't left. "Jensen," I whispered finally, voice tight. "We need to maybe call it a night? This place, it's too cold. Something's not right." He waved me off, still smiling, still brushing it off with jokes. "Relax, you're imagining things. Old houses are creepy. This is part of the job. Nothing we can't handle." I wanted to believe him. I tried. But the chill that wrapped around me, slipping under my shirt, touching my spine, told me otherwise. We ended up back in the main hallway, cold pressing in from every corner. My breath came out in short puffs, and I rubbed my arms until the skin burned. Jensen kept moving, seemingly unaffected, checking closets, shining his flashlight into every corner, laughing softly at the creepy noises the house made. I stayed behind him, feeling the cold more acutely than before. It wasn't just temperature. It was presence, watching, waiting, and it didn't like us. Finally, Jensen called down to the living room. No one here. Maybe he's in the attic? I hesitated at the foot of the stairs to the upper floor. The attic, of course. That dark, cramped space at the top of the house where things get lost and stay lost. My gut clenched tighter than ever. Yeah, Maybe, I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Tense, shaky, afraid. Jensen didn't notice. He went up, boots thudding on the steps. "You coming?" He called back over his shoulder. I hesitated again. The cold wasn't just physical anymore. It pressed against my mind, against my thoughts, whispering something I didn't want to hear. Something that told me the house wasn't empty, that nothing here was ever empty. I forced myself to step after him, flashlight beam cutting a narrow path up the staircase. Every creak of the wood felt louder than it should. Every shadow seemed too deep, too deliberate, and even as I moved, I knew we weren't alone. I could feel it brushing against the back of my neck, slipping under my sleeves, crawling down my spine. The attic door loomed above us, dark and closed. Jensen reached for the handle, and I felt my stomach twist. My hand shook, but I stayed behind him, watching the door as if it could swallow us whole. He pushed it open. The cold spilled out like a living thing, sharper than before, cutting through me. My flashlight flickered, and I caught a glimpse of something at the far corner of the attic. But when I blinked, it was gone. I swallowed hard. This was the point of no return. I didn't know it yet, but we were already too deep. The stairs creaked under Jensen's boots, louder than they had on the way up. I stayed a step behind him, flashlight shaking slightly in my grip. Every inch of this house felt like it was pressing in on me now, colder and heavier than before. The attic door loomed ahead. Jensen reached for the handle first, just like he always did, the grin still plastered on his face like he wasn't aware of how unnatural the cold had gotten. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to shout. My chest tightened, a knot of fear I couldn't shake. "Jensen, maybe we shouldn't—" But he didn't hear me. Or maybe he just didn't care. He pushed the door open, and the attic swallowed him in shadows. I followed, flashlight sweeping across the sloped ceiling, exposed beams, and the thick dust that hung like fog. The air hit me immediately, colder, sharper, like someone had cracked open a window to winter itself. "Nothing to worry about," Jensen said, his voice echoing strangely. "Just an old attic, dust, boxes, maybe a rat or two. Standard stuff." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the chill wasn't normal. Not for July, not for anywhere. It felt deliberate, aware. Like the house itself was alive, waiting for us to step where it wanted. He moved deeper into the room, flashlight cutting narrow slices of light across stacked boxes, old furniture and piles of forgotten things. Every object seemed wrong, too still, too deliberate, like they'd been arranged to watch us. "Hey, look at this," Jensen said after a moment, kneeling by a chest. He opened it, and a cloud of dust exploded into the beam of my flashlight. My coughs echoed off the rafters. Inside the chest were old clothes, yellowed papers, a few toys. Nothing unusual. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the shadows behind him. I could feel it pressing just out of reach of my flashlight's beam. Jensen stood up and turned around. "All right. No one hiding here, just old stuff." I nodded slowly, voice tight. "Yeah, just old stuff." But I didn't sound convinced. Then he paused, ears twitching, head tilting slightly like he heard something. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I froze. The attic was silent, dead silent, apart from our own breathing and the distant creak of the house settling. "Probably just the house," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He frowned, looking toward a far corner. "Maybe. Yeah, probably." Then he moved. Toward the far end of the attic, where the ceiling sloped low and shadows pooled. My stomach twisted as I followed, flashlight sweeping the area. The air felt heavier here, almost viscous, like it was pressing against my skin. I noticed then that the floorboards weren't just old. They were warped, twisting unnaturally. Each step Jensen took seemed to sink the boards slightly, and the shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't. "Jensen," I whispered, voice small. "Be careful," he waved me off. "Relax, it's just an attic." But the moment he stepped into the far corner, the air changed. The cold deepened, sharper now, like knives of frost pressing into my spine. My flashlight flickered again, the beam dimming just enough to make the shadows writhe. He reached for something behind an old cupboard, and then he was still. "Jensen?" My voice cracked. The cold pressed against my lungs. making it hard to breathe. He didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Hey, come on!" "Don't do this! Still nothing!" My flashlight flicked across the floor, across the stacks of boxes. And then I saw it. His boot half hidden behind the cupboard. He was standing there, frozen, as if something had him in place. "Jensen?" I took another step, heart hammering. The beam of my flashlight caught the edge of his jacket hanging strangely, almost wrong. Suddenly, I noticed the shadows in the corner. They weren't just shadows. They moved. Slim, elongated, creeping across the floor toward him, but not touching. They trembled, curling around the edges of the boxes, reaching. I gasped, stepping back. "Jensen!" He didn't move. He didn't respond. His flashlight was still on, beam pointing somewhere into the darkness, but it was like he wasn't even holding it anymore. I rushed forward, trying to grab him. The cold hit my hands first, sharp and burning like touching metal left out in frost. I stumbled back. "Jensen!" I shouted, panic clawing at my throat. The attic seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows twisting, reaching. My flashlight flickered again, and I swear I saw something just behind him, a figure crouched low, darker than the surrounding darkness. And then he moved. He stepped past me. Not looking at me, not acknowledging me, just walked forward, deeper into the shadows at the far end of the attic. My breath froze in my chest. I tried to follow, but every step I took felt heavier, as if the floor itself was pulling me back. "Jensen!" "Stop!" He didn't, not even a pause. He climbed up onto an old crate, then onto another, moving toward a hatch in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. The attic around him stretched like it was alive, walls bending slightly, shadows curling and thickening. I reached out, hand trembling. "Jensen, please, come back!" And then he was gone. The hatch closed silently behind him, like it had never been opened. The shadows retreated slightly, but the cold stayed, wrapping around me. My flashlight flickered violently, then steadied. I was alone. I stumbled backward, chest heaving, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't stay. The attic felt wrong. Not just wrong, but alive, watching, waiting. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew Jensen wasn't coming back right now. I backed toward the stairs, keeping my flashlight trained on every shadow. The house groaned around me. The cold didn't ease. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. I called his name again and again, voice cracking. Nothing. Just the heavy, unyielding silence, punctuated by the occasional creak of the house settling, or maybe something else moving in the shadows. I tried to think, rationally. He must have found some way to hide, to play a joke. But the look on his face just moments ago, the way he froze, I knew it wasn't him. Something had taken him attention, had drawn him in. And whatever it wasn't coming out. I forced myself to climb the stairs cautiously, hand on the railing. Every step groaned under my weight, echoing through the attic like a warning. I reached the hatch where he had disappeared. It was shut tight. Not a sign of the crate or anything else he had climbed. I tried to open it, locked, firm, unyielding. I banged on it. "Jensen! Jensen! Answer me!" Nothing. I sank to the floor, flashlight still on, breathing ragged. The shadows seemed to swirl at the edges of my vision. The cold pressed against me like a living thing, chilling me to the bone. Every instinct screamed that the attic was alive, that it had claimed him. I wanted to call it in, wanted to tell someone. But what could I say? My partner went into an attic and didn't come back, and something in the house is alive? No one would believe that. No one. I sat there trying to will my racing heartbeat to slow, trying to force my mind to make sense of it. But it made no sense. Houses didn't move. Shadows didn't reach. And yet, something had him. Something I couldn't see. Something that wasn't human. I stayed there until my flashlight began to flicker again. Until my teeth chattered too hard to speak. Until the cold felt like it had crept into my very bones. And still, Jensen didn't come back. I couldn't stop shaking even after I got back to the car. My hands were numb from the cold in the attic, and my mind was spinning too fast to think clearly. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the shadows, a moment of panic, but deep down, I knew better. Jensen wasn't coming back. The dashboard light illuminated the trembling of my hands as I fumbled with the radio. Dispatch didn't answer immediately, probably busy with routine calls. My voice sounded strange to me, too high, too frantic. Unit 6, I need backup. My partner. I couldn't finish. I couldn't make the words come out. My throat tightened. My stomach turned over. I just sat there staring at the streetlights outside, waiting, hoping someone would hear me before it was too late. They did eventually. Backup was dispatched, but it felt like hours before anyone arrived. When the other officers got there, they asked me questions, but I couldn't even begin to answer. How do you explain what happened in an attic that doesn't make sense? That seems alive? They said I should rest. They said I should write a report. And they suggested, casually, almost lightly, that I review Jensen's body cam footage. I didn't want to. I still don't, but I had to. The footage started with us entering the farmhouse, laughing, joking like we always did. I could see Jensen grinning at me, his eyes catching the flashlight beam, his sarcasm filling the air. The way he always did. Everything seemed normal, almost mundane. Then the camera turned. We were in the hallway. The cold was visible, not in any ordinary way. It wasn't fog or breath. It was like the light itself bent slightly, like the edges of the frame darkened unnaturally, the shadows curling in. I swallowed hard as I watched. I had felt it in the house, the presence pressing down, but seeing it made it real. Jensen led the way upstairs. I was behind him, body cam bouncing slightly with each step. My own voice on the footage sounded steadier than I remembered. I must have been frozen by the cold, by fear. Then we reached the attic door. I remembered that moment vividly, the cold hitting me first, sharp and suffocating. On the footage, I could see it, though it was distorted. The edges of the frame seemed darker than the rest, shadows folding in on themselves. Jensen opened the door, stepped inside. He paused. The camera caught him tilting his head, listening. My hands were shaking just watching it. The shadows behind him flickered, twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I leaned closer to the screen. There. Something moved behind him. A figure crouched low, darker than the darkness around it. I froze. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. My stomach lurched as I watched Jensen step forward, following something I couldn't see, and then he disappeared. Not in a fall, not in a stumble. He just vanished. The body cam caught the empty space where he had been standing. The shadows seemed to pulse, almost breathing, then retreat slightly as if satisfied. I blinked. My mouth went dry. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. My pulse hammered in my ears. I rewound the footage, watched it again. The same thing. Jensen stepped forward and gone. Nothing but the shadows moving. I played it again, slower this time. The shadows shifted differently when I slowed it down. They weren't random. They were deliberate. They reached, curling at the edges of the frame, trailing along the floor and walls like living smoke. Then I noticed it. Something behind him. Something just beyond the flashlight's beam. Something watching. It didn't move like a human. Not even like an animal. More like the darkness itself had taken shape. A low, crouched figure, limbs too long, bending in angles that shouldn't exist. The edges of the frame warped around it, blacker than the rest of the shadows. My chest tightened. My fingers froze over the controls. The figure shifted slightly, tilting its head as if it knew the camera was on. It watched him, waited. Then the footage. Cut, just black. The body cam stopped recording. No sound. No movement. Nothing. Just static. I couldn't breathe. I sat there staring at the black screen, seeing it in my mind's eye. The figure, the cold, the shadows crawling across the floor. I tried to reason. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the camera was faulty. But the shadow? I knew what I had seen. And Jensen had gone into that blackness, and he hadn't come back. Dispatch called me a few minutes later, asking if I was all right. I told them I was fine. I lied. I couldn't tell them what I had seen. Who would believe me? How do you explain shadows that move, cold that burns like frost, and a partner disappearing into thin air? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the attic ceiling, the slanted beams, the crate he had climbed. I saw the figure crouched in the corner, its long limbs bending impossibly. The cold, the silence. I kept the footage running on loop, watched it over and over. Every time I did, I saw something new in the shadows. Shapes shifting, edges darkening, almost imperceptible movements behind the main frame. I could see them reaching for him, waiting. And I realized something. It wasn't just in the attic. It had followed him there. It had been waiting for him the moment we stepped inside. It had been patient, silent, watching. The next day, the department sent a team back to the farmhouse. I stayed outside, trying to convince myself it was for the best. They went in, searched every room, every corner, every closet. They found nothing. No Jensen, no sign of struggle. Just an empty attic, cold and silent, as if it had never been disturbed. I asked if anyone had seen something unusual. The officers shook their heads. Nothing. No unusual shadows, no cold spots, nothing. Just the same old house, waiting in silence. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run far away and never look back. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because I had seen it on the footage. And I knew in the pit of my stomach that it hadn't finished. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I can feel it. The same cold pressing against my skin. The same weight of silence. Shadows in the corners, stretching just a fraction too far. And I can hear it. Almost whispering. Patient. Waiting. The body cam is in my desk drawer now. I don't watch it as often as I used to. I can't. Every time I do, I see more of it. More of the shadows. More of what took him. Sometimes, I think I can see Jensen in the footage, just for a second, in the corner of the frame, standing still, waiting, watching, and then the screen goes black. I can't bring myself to delete it. I can't bring myself to stop watching, because if I do, I might miss something. Something that tells me where he went. Something that tells me if he's still out there. The cold never leaves. It follows me, presses against my skin. I can feel it in my bones deep, like the house left a part of itself inside me. And the shadows, they linger. In the corners, in the periphery, always watching. I know I should move on. I know I should leave it behind. But I can't. Not yet, because Jensen is still up there. And I don't know if he'll ever come back. I never thought a radio could sound alive. But sitting in my cruiser, engine idling against the quiet of the abandoned subdivision, it felt like it was listening. Not just picking up signals, not just static. It was aware. The first time it happened, I shrugged it off. I'd been on night shift long enough to know that radios are messy, picking up transmissions from police, fire, even CB channels from who knows where. But this was different. I was driving slowly, tires crunching over cracked asphalt and weeds forcing their way up through the concrete, past the rows of houses that looked like someone had pressed pause on a neighborhood in the middle of the 80s. Empty swing sets creaked in the wind. Mailboxes sagged like tired faces. And over it all, the radio began to hum. At first, it was faint, almost indistinguishable from the white noise. Then a voice cut through. Turn. Left. I froze, hand on the wheel. No one was in the subdivision. No headlights behind me, no footsteps, just the sound of the wind through broken windows. I twisted the dial, nothing, just static. Turn left. It wasn't coming from the street, it wasn't coming from the houses. It was from the radio. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was a prank, a recording. Maybe someone had a CB in their car messing with me. But then the voice got clearer and familiar. Red car, slowing. I looked down. My cruiser's taillights reflected in the broken windows. My own heartbeat thudded against the steering wheel. I gripped it tighter, scanning the street. Empty, absolutely empty. I flipped the radio off. The voice stopped. The hum lingered. I turned it back on. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then, it started again. Windows. Closed? I jerked my head around. All of them. Houses that had been empty for decades. Their broken panes rattling in the night wind. How could the radio... My rational mind fought to keep control. Electrical interference. Maybe there was a weak signal from some old CB tower bouncing around the empty streets. That had to be it. But the more I drove, the more the voices came. They're watching. You're watching. And always, always describing me. Things I was doing right then. I could feel my stomach turn over. The radio didn't just speak, it narrated. It knew my speed, my lane changes, even when I sighed when I adjusted the mirror. Hand. On wheel? I snapped my eyes to my left, half expecting to see someone crouched behind a mailbox. There was nothing. Just the shadows. The weeds. The abandoned houses staring like hollow eyes. I tried to shake it off, told myself to focus on the call I was supposed to take. A routine patrol, nothing out of the ordinary. But the subdivision was no ordinary place. Every house looked like a memory pressed flat, like time had forgotten them. Some still had furniture rotting inside, curtains hanging like fingers reaching out. And that radio, it followed me, seatbelt tight. The calm, clipped voice like someone reading from a list. But it carried weight, threat, observation, judgment. I slowed the car, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. My mouth was dry. Not leave. I slammed the brakes, tires squealing against the uneven asphalt. My head whipped around, nothing. The streetlights were out. Only the faint glow of my dashboard, illuminating dust motes floating in the air, broken by the occasional flicker of a dead street lamp. I wanted to call it in, radio my dispatcher. Say, something weird's going on. But the second I touched the radio, it whispered again. Calling, calling, and I froze. My own voice, low, distorted, almost as if I were talking to myself from a mile away. It wasn't saying my name, but it was mine. There's a difference. You can hear a recording of someone, and you can hear them. But hearing yourself, speaking, words you didn't say, that makes you question every reality you've ever known. I fumbled with the volume knob. It wouldn't stop. I tried changing channels, static, whispers, fragments of sentences that made my stomach twist. Behind to slow down. Every word timed perfectly with my movements. Every pause, every turn, every breath, and always the sense that something else was out there, moving just beyond the edge of the streetlight's glow. Something that had been there all along, waiting. I remembered the officer before me, another patrol in this area, who disappeared years ago. They never found him. Just his cruiser abandoned at the corner of Maple and Cedar, doors open, radio humming. The dispatcher's voice had gone static before they even realized something was wrong. They called it a technical issue. I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell myself it was ridiculous. But the memory stuck in my head as I drove past another row of houses, peeling paint and shattered glass, catching the dim light like teeth. Red cruiser. Speeding to pulse. The words were never exact. Always fragments, like someone was describing me to a friend. But close enough. Close enough to make me sweat under the collar. I passed a house with its front door ajar, swinging slightly. The radio hissed. Stop! Look. See? And I did. My headlights fell on the empty interior. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Yet I felt a presence. Something watching from the shadows pressed against the walls. Eyes that didn't exist, but I could feel them. The air inside my car grew thick, like the heat from the dashboard had turned into something heavier. I coughed, tried to blink away the fear, and kept moving. Turn! Off! Stop! I was driving in circles now. The subdivision seemed bigger than the map said. Streets twisted into dead ends I didn't remember, alleys that shouldn't exist. And the radio never stopped. It narrated my panic, measured it, studied it. Heart, racing, hands. I pressed the horn. Nothing. I hit the brakes. Nothing. The engine roared, but it felt small. My world had shrunk to the seat beneath me. The wheel in my hands, the radio murmuring in the background. Red car. Alone. Vulnerable. I almost didn't see it. The swing in front of a house that had fallen over, hitting the ground with a slow, deliberate groan. My reflection in the rear view caught my eyes wide, sweat gleaming on my forehead. The voice, my voice, calling me by the things I could feel but couldn't admit. I tried to stop, tried to turn around. Every street looked the same. Every corner led me deeper, and through it all the radio whispered. Knowing, laughing softly in a way I couldn't place but could feel in my bones. Closer, closer, nearer. I realized then that it wasn't just a voice on the radio. It was part of the place, part of the subdivision. It existed in the cracks of the pavement, in the peeling paint, in the empty windows. Watching me, waiting, and it used the radio to speak, to mark its territory, to remind me I was never alone. By the time I left the subdivision, the sky was beginning to lighten, though the houses still loomed like tombstones in the dawn. I parked my cruiser at the edge of the last street, hands shaking, heart pounding. The radio was silent now. I hadn't touched the dial. I know it will come back. I know that voice is still out there, somewhere, listening, waiting. And when the night falls again, when the streets go dark and the abandoned homes stand empty, it will find me again. The radio kept picking it up. And I know, deep down, it never really lets go. I thought leaving the subdivision would be the end of it. That driving past the empty streets, past the sagging houses and weeds pushing through cracked asphalt, would leave the voice behind. But it didn't. Not really. By the time I got back to the main road, my cruiser's engine felt heavier, as if the weight of what I'd experienced was pressing down from every angle. I parked at a diner that hadn't seen customers in years, lit my cigarette, and tried to tell myself it was over. I listened to the radio. Silence. Normal channels. Dispatch chatter. Nothing out of place until I heard it. Come. Inside. I jerked my head toward the radio. My own voice. Distorted. Drawn out like it had been buried in gravel and mud. I hadn't said anything like that. Not tonight. Not ever. I cursed under my breath. Static hissed, and then, for a split second, the faint sound of footsteps. Not my own. Behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just the wind through the broken windows of the diner. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I had to check one of the houses. I had to see if what I was hearing was real or if I was losing my mind. I drove back, taking the same streets, the shadows of the abandoned homes stretching long and twisted in the headlights. My hands were sweating, gripping the wheel so hard I could feel my knuckles whiten. The radio was quiet now, almost polite. Waiting. I stopped in front of a house I hadn't gone near before. It was smaller than the others, but somehow it felt like it was leaning toward me, like it wanted me inside. The lawn was overgrown, grass scratching the bottom of the cruiser. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Step. Closer! My stomach turned over. My hands shook. But I got out anyway. The air smelled damp like mold and rot. I moved slowly, feet crunching on gravel. Every shadow seemed to twitch as I passed. Every broken window reflecting back 1,000 possibilities of what could be inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Dust floated in the pale moonlight, hanging in the empty rooms like ghosts. My radio sitting on the passenger seat crackled. I'm here. Leave. I froze, my own voice screaming. It wasn't just distorted now. It was terrified. I was terrified. The sound was raw, unfiltered, pleading. My own words, coming from a machine I had trusted to speak only with dispatch. I wanted to run. I wanted to slam the door and drive away as fast as I could, but something held me there. Curiosity, fear, or maybe the need to know exactly how deep this went. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Every step echoed through the empty rooms, bouncing off walls that had been stripped of paint and wallpaper. The smell of rot grew stronger. Something skittered across the floor behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The radio hissed again. Don't move. I felt it before I saw it. A presence. Heavy. Suffocating. Something that wasn't alive, but wasn't nothing either. It hovered just beyond my vision, a shape that pressed against the edges of the room. I swallowed hard, telling myself this was just fear, just the night playing tricks on a tired officer. Then the voice changed. Not mine, not fully. It echoed mine, but higher, sharper, desperate. Get out now! I dropped the radio. It clattered across the floor. Silence. For a heartbeat, the house was still. Then the floorboards behind me creaked again, slow, deliberate. I turned, and there it was. Or maybe nothing. A shadow moving against the corner of my eye, always in the periphery. I couldn't look directly at it without feeling my chest tighten. I started walking toward the door. Each step measured, careful, trying not to make the presence angrier, trying not to draw it closer. And then the radio screamed again. My voice, my tone, my exact words from earlier that night. Don't leave. It knows. The sound made me stagger backward. My heart was hammering. My legs refused to cooperate. I fell to the floor, hands covering my ears. But the voice drilled into me anyway. It didn't matter that I couldn't hear it with my ears. It was inside my head, echoing in my skull. My own voice screaming at me to leave. And then I saw it. Not a figure, not a person, but a distortion. The air above the floor shimmered, a heat wave maybe, but colder, darker. The shadows stretched and twisted. It moved toward me without walking. The floor didn't creak under it. The walls didn't bend. And still it was closer. I crawled toward the door. My fingers scrapped against the splintered wood. I could feel the cold brush of something behind me. The radio's screaming had become a chorus, overlapping with itself, my voice crying, panicked, pleading. I reached the door. Pulled it open. Moonlight spilled in. I scrambled out, gasping, boots hitting the gravel, hands bleeding from the edges of the door frame. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until my cruiser was in sight, the radio still on the passenger seat. I jumped in, slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I turned the key. Engine roared to life. I grabbed the radio. Silence. I tore it from the dashboard and threw it out the window. It hit the pavement, burst open, wires spilling like guts. And still, in my head, the voice lingered. I drove out of the subdivision, tires kicking up dirt and debris, adrenaline pushing me faster than I've ever driven. I didn't stop until I hit the main road. The sky was turning gray, the first hints of dawn. And still, in the back of my mind, the echo of my own voice, screaming, warning, pleading. Back at the station, I filed my report. Nothing made sense. Nothing explained what I'd heard, what I'd felt. The dispatcher listened politely, nodded, and said, I must have been hearing things. Fatigue, stress, standard procedure. But I know. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know I'll hear it again. That voice isn't just in the radio. It's in the house, in the subdivision, in the shadows. And it knows me, every night since I can't escape it. Every patrol, every lonely stretch of road, I hear whispers, fragments of sentences, sometimes my own voice repeating itself. I don't know if it's following me or if I'm carrying it now. But one thing is certain, night shift never ends. Not really. Not for me, and the radio, it's waiting.